It was a Tuesday that, at first glance, was indistinguishable from the countless other Tuesdays that made up the monotonous tapestry of our existence. The sun, if it dared to show its face from behind the constant mist of hopelessness that seemed to hang over our house, had already set, giving way to the melancholic twilight that painted the sky in shades of gray and faded purple. The smell, the smell of burnt lasagna. It hung over the small Miller kitchen like a cloud of impending doom, dense and inescapable, permeating every corner and every fiber of our already suffocated reality. Not that burnt lasagna was the biggest misfortune in our lives, far from it. The list was long and varied, an exhaustive inventory of minor misfortunes that, when added up, formed an insurmountable mountain of worries. There was the car, a Ford Focus from the last decade, that stubbornly refused to start on colder mornings, forcing us to use public transport and adding an extra layer of stress to already burdened days. There was the kitchen sink pipe, which had been incessantly dripping for months, a constant reminder of repairs we couldn't afford and which, ironically, contributed to the burnt lasagna by diverting our attention to the frustration of the dripping water. And of course, there was the stack of bills on the dining room table, a precarious monument that rivaled the Leaning Tower of Pisa in its dangerous tilt, threatening to collapse at any moment and bury us under a pile of debt. But that night, the carbonized lasagna seemed like the icing on the cake of our precarious existence, an edible symbol of all our failures and our inability to keep things running. George, my husband, the eternal optimist, whom the universe seemed intent on knocking down, was in the kitchen, grumbling about the freshly arrived electricity bill. His broad shoulders, usually a safe haven for me and our children, were hunched under the weight of invisible worries. He was trying, without much success, to arrange the groceries in the small, overflowing refrigerator, a true puzzle of expired yogurt containers and last week's pizza leftovers. It was precisely in this scenario of culinary chaos and financial despair that the minor tragedy occurred. George, in a moment of inattention, or perhaps pure exhaustion, bumped into the counter and knocked over the grocery bag that rested precariously on the edge. The sound of tomatoes rolling across the floor and the pasta package opening, spilling spaghetti everywhere, was almost musical in its misfortune. Emily, our 16-year-old teenage daughter, who was glued to her phone as if her life depended on the next status update, let out a groan of exasperation. "Dad," she exclaimed, without even looking up from the screen, "can't you do anything?" "Right." Tom, our youngest at 8, who was building a pillow fort in the living room, laughed at the situation, oblivious to the tension in the air. I, who was desperately trying to scrape the burnt part off the lasagna with a wooden spoon, let out a sigh that contained all the frustration of years of tight budgets and unfulfilled promises. "George, for heaven's sake," I said, my voice bordering on hysteria, "we couldn't afford to lose those tomatoes." That's when it happened. Amidst the bruised tomatoes and a tangle of raw pasta, a small, crumpled, forgotten piece of checkered paper shimmered under the dim kitchen light. It was the lottery ticket, a Powerball ticket, to be exact. George, with the stubbornness only a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown can possess, knelt to pick up the mess. His hand brushed against the ticket, and he picked it up, more by reflex than by any intention. "Oh, the lottery ticket," he mumbled, a hint of disillusionment already in his voice. Once again, the ticket of disappointment. We bought these tickets every week, more out of habit than hope. It was one of those small, irrational bets against fate that allowed us to dream for a few seconds before harsh reality pulled us back down to earth. I always told George it was a waste of money, that the odds were slimmer than a penguin learning to fly, but he always retorted with a crooked smile, "What if it's our turn, honey? What if it's our turn?" He pulled his phone from his pocket, the lottery app already open, and began checking the numbers. His fingers, usually clumsy, moved with an almost ritualistic slowness. The first number, the second, the third. My heart beat in a monotonous rhythm, keeping pace with George's ragged breathing. I wasn't really paying attention. My mind was on the lasagna, the tomatoes, the bills. I was already expecting the sigh of defeat, the sarcastic comment about our eternal bad luck. But the sigh didn't come. Instead, silence settled. A silence that, at first, was just the absence of sound. But soon it became a deafening silence, so heavy you could cut it with a butter knife. It was the kind of silence that precedes an earthquake. the omen of something immense and unforeseen. Emily, who until then had been hypnotized by her phone screen, her headphones isolating her from the world, looked up, her eyes, usually bored, fixed on George, who was frozen on the kitchen floor, the crumpled lottery ticket in one hand and his phone in the other. Tom, who moments before had been engrossed in his pillow fort, dropped his remote control car, sensing the abrupt shift in the atmosphere. He looked at us with the innocent curiosity of a child who senses something big, but doesn't know what. And then George let out a scream, not a scream of joy, nor of panic. It was a primal scream, something between the roar of a wounded lion and the shrill squeal of a frightened pig. It was a sound that came from the depths of his soul, an intoxicating mix of shock, disbelief, and a dose of existential terror. The neighbors must have thought we were being robbed, or that the lasagna had finally exploded, blowing up the entire kitchen. For a second, I thought the same. My heart pounded, and cold sweat ran down my forehead. George was pale, his eyes wide, fixed on the ticket. His lips trembled, trying to form words that simply wouldn't come out. He mumbled something about millions, and we won, but the words were lost in a final gasp of pure astonishment. I, in a trance of disbelief, took the ticket from his trembling hands. My own hands were shaking, and the paper seemed to burn in my fingers. I started checking the numbers, once, twice, 8 numbers, all marked. The Powerball, the number that seals destiny to 36, my grandmother's lucky number. It couldn't be. My brain refused to process the information. My eyes fixed on George's phone screen, which showed the same numbers. 10 times I checked, my eyes darting back and forth, searching for a mistake, an error, anything that could bring me back to the comfortable reality of our daily poverty. But there was no mistake. The numbers were identical. We had won the lottery, the grand prize. The crying came next, a chorus of sobs and hysterical laughter that echoed through the house, mixing with the persistent smell of burnt lasagna. George, who was in shock, finally managed to stand up and hugged me with a strength that took my breath away. Emily and Tom, who had been watching the scene with a mixture of curiosity and dread, finally understood. Emily let out a sharp cry of joy that made my ears ring, while Tom jumped and yelled about buying all the video games in the world. The burnt lasagna was completely forgotten, replaced by clumsy hugs, tears of happiness, and the loud pop of a cheap champagne bottle, which George had been saving for a special occasion for years, exploding in the kitchen. The bubbling liquid spilled onto the floor, but no one cared. It was unbelievable. It was a liberation. And it was just the beginning of our own particular Greek comedy, the first act of a play we could barely imagine. From that moment on, the Millers' lives would never be the same, and the burnt lasagna would become a legend, the symbol of a before and after that would change everything. Chapter 2. The deafening silence and the scream that woke the neighbors. The euphoria, a dizzying concoction of disbelief and raw elation, washed over us like a tidal wave, momentarily eclipsing the perpetual scent of burnt lasagna that had become the defining olfactory signature of our humble abode. George, still on his knees amidst the scattered spaghetti and bruised tomatoes, looked up at me, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. His usual weary gaze had been replaced by an almost childlike wonder, his eyes wide and glistening. Emily, our perpetually cynical teenager, had dropped her phone, the screen now dark, her mouth agape in an uncharacteristic display of awe. Tom, the youngest, his pillow fort forgotten, stood frozen, a remote control still clutched in his hand, his usually boisterous energy replaced by a stunned stillness. At first, no one really gave the lottery ticket much thought. It was just there, a crumpled piece of paper that had fallen out of a grocery bag, indistinguishable from the myriad of other insignificant scraps that littered our chaotic kitchen. We bought these tickets every week, a ritual born more of a faint, almost subconscious hope than any real expectation. It was a futile gesture, a tiny rebellion against the crushing weight of reality, a fleeting moment of what if before the inevitable what is. I always chided George for it, for wasting what little money we had on a pipe dream. George, I'd say, my voice laced with the bitterness of 1,000 unpaid bills. The odds of winning are like a snowball's chance in hell. We're just throwing money away. He'd always just smile, that tired, optimistic smile, and shrugged. You never know, honey, someone's gotta win, right? Might as well be us. This time, however, there was no smile, no shrug, just a profound, unsettling stillness. George, with a methodicalness that was utterly uncharacteristic of his usual haphazard approach to life, picked up the ticket. His hands, usually fumbling and prone to dropping things, now held the small slip of paper with a delicate precision, as if it were a fragile relic. He pulled out his battered smartphone, its cracked screen a testament to countless accidental drops, and opened the lottery app. His brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving silently as he cross-referenced the numbers. My heart, which moments ago had been beating a dull, rhythmic thud in my chest, now began to pick up pace, a frantic drum against my ribs. A sliver of something akin to hope, a feeling I hadn't truly entertained in years, dared to bloom in my chest. The first number, then the second. George's breath hitched. My eyes, involuntarily, flickered between the ticket and his face, searching for a clue, any indication of what was unfolding. Emily, sensing the shift in the air, slowly approached, her teenage nonchalance momentarily forgotten. Tom, emboldened by his sister's movement, crept closer to his small hand, instinctively reaching for mine. The silence that followed was so profound, so heavy, it was as if the air itself had solidified. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was an active, almost oppressive presence. It felt like the world had paused, holding its breath with us. You could have cut it with a butter knife, as the old saying goes. It was the kind of silence that precedes an earthquake, the pregnant pause before a storm breaks, the ominous quiet before a scream. It was the sound of a universe holding its breath, waiting for a reveal. Emily, who until then had been utterly engrossed in the digital world of her phone, slowly lifted her head. Her usually bored eyes, accustomed to scrolling through endless feeds, widened in a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. She looked at George, who was still kneeling on the kitchen floor, frozen in a tableau of disbelief, the crumpled lottery ticket clutched in one hand, his phone in the other. Tom, who moments earlier had been completely absorbed in the intricate architecture of his pillow fort, slowly let go of his remote control car. It clattered softly to the floor, a tiny punctuation mark in the vast silence. He stared at his father, then at me, his small face a mixture of curiosity and a nascent fear. And then George let out a scream. It wasn't a scream of pure joy, though joy was certainly a component. It wasn't a scream of pure panic, though a touch of terror undoubtedly laced its edges. It was a primal scream, something raw and untamed that tore from the depths of his being. It was a sound that defied easy categorization, an unsettling blend of a lion's roar and a startled pig's squeal, infused with the guttural release of years of pent-up frustration, worry, and unfulfilled dreams. It was the sound of a man who had been pushed to the brink, who had lived on the razor's edge of financial desperation for so long. Suddenly realizing the ground beneath him had shifted, the sheer volume and unexpectedness of it made me jump, nearly dropping the burnt lasagna. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. For a split second, my mind, accustomed to domestic crises, immediately conjured up the worst. Had he been electrocuted by a faulty appliance? Had he seen a spider of monstrous proportions? Or, perhaps, had the burnt lasagna finally achieved sentience and launched an attack? The neighbors must have thought we were being robbed, or perhaps that the lasagna had finally achieved critical mass and exploded, taking the entire kitchen with it. I, for a fleeting moment, thought the same. Cold sweat pricked my skin, and a wave of nausea washed over me. George was pale, his face ashen, his eyes bugged out, fixed on the lottery ticket. His lips trembled, trying desperately to form words, but they seemed to get stuck in his throat, dissolving into garbled syllables. He managed to stammer something, a strangled sound that vaguely resembled millions, and we won, but the words were lost in a final, choked gasp of pure, unadulterated astonishment. His entire body shook, vibrating with an energy that seemed too immense for his frame. I, in a daze of disbelief, reached out and gently took the ticket from his trembling hands. My own hands were now shaking uncontrollably, and the small piece of paper felt strangely hot against my skin, as if it held an immense, burning power. My eyes, still struggling to comprehend, fixed on the numbers. I checked them, once, then twice. 8 numbers, all perfectly matched. My eyes darted to the Powerball, the single digit that determines the grand prize, 36, my grandmother's lucky number, a detail that, in the midst of this surreal moment, struck me with an odd sense of cosmic humor. No, it couldn't be. My brain, accustomed to the mundane, the predictable, the perpetually disappointing, utterly refused to process this colossal, life-altering information. It felt like a cruel joke, a sudden, tantalizing mirage. My eyes flickered back and forth between the ticket in my hand and George's phone screen, which displayed the exact same winning numbers. I checked 10 times, my gaze frantically searching for a discrepancy, an error, any tiny detail that could pull me back to the comfortable, albeit bleak, reality of our everyday poverty. But there was no error, no mistake, no cruel twist of fate. The numbers were identical. We had won the lottery, the grand prize. Millions thought the crying came next. Not a single sob, but a tumultuous chorus of hysterical laughter and gasping sobs that echoed through our small house, mingling strangely with the lingering, almost sweet, scent of the burnt lasagna. George, who had been in a state of suspended animation, finally managed to rise, his legs wobbly, and enveloped me in a hug so tight it almost squeezed the air out of my lungs. Emily, who had watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of terror and nascent hope, finally understood. She let out a high-pitched shriek of pure, unadulterated joy that made my ears ring, while Tom, now fully awake and aware, started jumping up and down, yelling about buying every single video game in the world. The burnt lasagna, a symbol of our previous struggles, was utterly forgotten, relegated to the dusty corners of our minds, replaced by clumsy, tearful embraces, laughter that bordered on hysteria, and the loud, triumphant pop of a cheap champagne bottle. George, in a moment of foresight or perhaps just wishful thinking, had kept it for a special occasion for years, gathering dust in the back of the pantry. The bubbly liquid spilled onto the worn kitchen floor, creating a small, shimmering puddle, but no one cared. It was unbelievable. It was a liberation, and it was just the beginning of our own particular Greek comedy, the first act of a play we could barely imagine. From that moment on, the Millers' lives would never, ever be the same. And the burnt lasagna, the catalyst of it all, would forever be etched in our family history as the fragrant, albeit charred, harbinger of a new, bewildering, and utterly spectacular era. Chapter 3, The Confirmation, the Tears, and the first unusual request. George was still kneeling on the linoleum floor, a modern-day supplicant before the altar of sudden wealth. His face was a mask of disbelief, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the crumpled lottery ticket that now lay, a beacon of improbable hope, in my trembling hand. The words he'd stammered, "Millions, we won," echoed in the sudden, jarring silence that had fallen over the kitchen after his primal scream. It was as if the universe itself had paused, waiting for us to catch up to the impossible reality that had just slammed into our lives like a rogue asteroid. I gripped the ticket, my knuckles white, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My mind, usually a chaotic whirlwind of budgets, overdue bills, and the perpetual struggle to make ends meet, was now a blank slate. It was an involuntary defense mechanism, a desperate attempt to reject the enormity of what was happening. This kind of thing didn't happen to people like us. We were the Millers, the epitome of ordinary, the poster family for just getting by. Lottery wins were for people on TV, for stories in the tabloids, not for a family whose biggest excitement usually involved finding a forgotten $20 bill in an old coat pocket. Are you sure? I whispered, my voice barely audible, a fragile thread in the heavy air. George, still seemingly in a state of suspended animation, slowly nodded, his eyes never leaving the ticket. His face was so pale, it looked like he'd seen a ghost, a very wealthy, benevolent ghost. Perhaps. Emily, our cynical, screen-addicted teenager, was the first to break the spell. Her usual mask of teenage apathy had completely dissolved, replaced by a wide-eyed, almost childlike wonder. She slowly walked over, her bare feet patting softly on the scattered spaghetti, and peered over my shoulder. Her breath hitched. "No way," she breathed, her voice a barely audible whisper. "No freaking way." Tom, our ape of boundless energy, now stood transfixed, his eyes darting between George, the ticket, and Emily's awestruck face. He seemed to grasp the gravity of the moment, even if the concept of millions was still abstract. Did we win a lot of money?" he asked, his voice small, laced with a hopeful innocence that tugged at my heart. My eyes, still in denial, darted back to the crumpled ticket, then to George's phone, still open on the lottery app, displaying the winning numbers. I started to check them again, this time with a frantic urgency. My finger, trembling, traced each digit on the ticket, then moved to the screen. B-5. Yes, B5 I-17, yes, I-17, UN-32, yes, N-32, G-49, yes, G-49, OI-65, yes, O-65, and then the Powerball, the final, decisive number that turned dreams into reality, or shattered them into a million pieces. Powerball, 36, yes, 36.30-6. It was unmistakable. Every single number, matching perfectly. A gasp tore from my throat. It wasn't just a gasp, it was a sob, a laugh, a cry of sheer, overwhelming disbelief all rolled into one. My vision blurred as tears welled up, hot and fast, streaming down my face. My hands, still clutching the ticket, started to shake so violently I thought I might drop it. "Oh my God," I choked out, the words catching in my throat. "Oh my God, George. We actually won." And then the crying came. Not a quiet sniffle, not a polite shedding of tears. It was an explosion, a symphony of raw, unbridled emotion. My own sobs were loud, ragged, punctuated by gasps for air. George, finally breaking free from his stunned paralysis, let out a choked cry, a sound of pure relief and overwhelming joy, and pulled me into a fierce embrace. His arms, usually burdened by the weight of responsibility, now felt light, almost buoyant. Emily, who had been a silent observer, suddenly erupted. She let out a piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated joy that could probably be heard down the street. It was the kind of scream that only a teenager who has just discovered their wildest dreams might actually come true can produce. She threw her arms around both of us, burying her face in my shoulder, her own body shaking with unrestrained delight. Tom, who had been watching us with wide, uncertain eyes, finally grasped the magnitude of the situation. He let out a joyful whoop, a pure, innocent sound of happiness, and started jumping up and down, his small fists pumping the air. "We're rich, we're rich, we're rich," he chanted, his voice echoing in the small kitchen. The burnt lasagna, a symbol of our struggles, a monument to our daily culinary failures, was utterly, completely forgotten. It sat on the counter, still emanating its pungent, charred aroma. A silent witness to the unfolding chaos and jubilation. It was replaced by a tangled mess of limbs, of desperate hugs, of tear-streaked faces pressed against each other. George, his eyes still moist, somehow managed to stumble to the pantry, his mind clearly racing, and pulled out a dusty bottle of cheap champagne. It was a relic from a long-forgotten New Year's Eve, saved for a special occasion that we never truly believed would arrive, with a triumphant pop that made us all jump. The cork flew across the room, nearly taking out the flickering fluorescent light. The bubbly liquid foamed over, spilling onto the already messy floor, but no one cared. We laughed through our tears, a cacophony of relief and disbelief. It was surreal. It was unbelievable. It was, in a word, liberation. A sudden, exhilarating freedom from the suffocating grip of financial anxiety that had been our constant companion for years. This wasn't just a lottery win. It was a reset button, a cosmic do-over. It was an escape from the endless cycle of making ends meet, of scrimping and saving, of postponing dreams. It was a promise, a beacon of hope shining brightly in the previously dim landscape of our lives. And it was just the beginning of our Greek comedy particular. The first act, the opening scene of a play we could barely imagine, filled with plot twists, unexpected characters, and undoubtedly, a healthy dose of dramatic irony. The Millers, a family defined by their very ordinariness, were about to be thrust into a world they were completely unprepared for, as the initial wave of euphoria began to subside, replaced by a thrilling, almost terrifying sense of what lay ahead. Emily, still flushed with excitement, pulled away from our embrace. Her eyes, usually glued to her phone, now sparkled with a mischievous glint. She looked at George, then at me, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Okay, so," she began, her voice still a little shaky from crying, but now infused with a newfound confidence. "First thing tomorrow, we're buying a Ferrari, right? And a mansion with an infinity pool." George and I exchanged a look, the kind of look that parents give each other when their child, amidst a moment of profound, life-altering change, makes a request so utterly outlandish and predictable, it borders on parody. The tears were still wet on our cheeks, the champagne was still bubbling on the floor, And already, the first unusual request had been made. The comedy had officially begun. This was going to be an interesting ride. If you're already on the edge of your seat and can't wait to see what hilarious and dramatic twists and turns await the Miller family after this incredible win, don't miss a single moment. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media, and hit that notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new chapter drops. We're so grateful you're joining us on this wild ride. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what's your name? Let us know in the comments below. Chapter 4, The First Rules and the Unbreakable Pact. Not really. The initial storm of tears and ecstatic screams had finally subsided, leaving behind a strangely calm, albeit still disorienting, atmosphere in the Miller kitchen. The lingering scent of burnt lasagna now seemed to mix with the fainter, more celebratory aroma of cheap champagne, creating a bizarre olfactive metaphor for our new reality. George, still slightly pale but with a new, almost regal bearing, stood amidst the scattered remnants of spaghetti, the crumpled lottery ticket now carefully smoothed out and placed on the counter like a sacred scroll. Emily and Tom, their faces still flushed with the afterglow of pure unadulterated joy, were bouncing on the balls of their feet, their eyes shining with visions of future grandeur. With the first wave of euphoria passing, the chilling tendrils of reality slowly began to creep in. Millions of dollars. The words, once abstract and distant, now felt tangible, heavy, almost overwhelming. What would we do with so much money? The question hung in the air, vast and intimidating, stretching before us like an uncharted ocean. Our lives, until this very moment, had been a constant, grinding struggle against scarcity. Every decision, every purchase, every dream, had been filtered through the harsh lens of our meager budget. Now, that lens was shattered, and the world seemed to expand exponentially, dizzyingly, before our very eyes. George, ever the pragmatist, even in the face of the miraculous, was the first to regain some semblance of composure. He cleared his throat, a sound that seemed oddly formal in our disheveled kitchen. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, considering he'd been screaming like a banshee moments earlier. "Listen up." Emily mid-bounce stopped. Tom, who had been attempting to scale the refrigerator in his excitement, paused. They looked at their father, their eyes still reflecting the gleam of untold riches. This is huge," George continued, gesturing vaguely at the lottery ticket. "Life-changing, but we can't lose our heads. We have to be smart about this." He then took a deep breath, his shoulders squaring, as if preparing for a monumental task. "I propose a pact." A pact. The word itself sounded ancient, binding. Emily rolled her eyes, a classic teenage reaction to anything that remotely resembled an adult trying to exert control. Tom, however, looked intrigued. "First rule," George announced, holding up a finger, his voice gaining a newfound, almost paternal, gravitas. "We keep our feet on the ground." He looked pointedly at Emily, who was already visualizing herself arriving at school in a limousine. No immediate, crazy splurges. No buying private jets or islands tomorrow. We need to think, to plan. Emily groaned dramatically. "But Dad, what's the point of winning if we can't buy cool stuff?" "The point," George countered, his gaze firm, "is to make sure this money lasts, and that it genuinely improves our lives, not destroys them." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Second rule, we don't tell anyone beyond the immediate family." He swept his gaze from me, to Emily, then to Tom. "No friends, no distant relatives, no one at school, no one at work. This is our secret." For now, my heart gave a little lurch. This was going to be the hardest rule to follow, especially for Emily, who thrived on social currency. I could already picture the envious whispers, the sudden influx of friends we hadn't heard from in years. The thought of keeping such a monumental secret felt like trying to hold back a tsunami with a teacup. "Third rule," George pressed on, oblivious to my internal turmoil. "No impulsive spending. Every major decision, every significant purchase, has to be discussed and agreed upon by all of us. No one goes rogue." He looked pointedly at Tom, who had a mischievous glint in his eye, undoubtedly contemplating a swimming pool filled with chocolate milk. "And finally, we plan every single step. We get good financial advice. We think about the future. We think about college, about retirement, about what we really want out of life, not just what's flashy." He finished, looking at each of us, his expression a mixture of hope and stern determination. Agreed. Emily, who had been silently calculating the cost of a walk-in closet filled with designer clothes, let out a frustrated sigh. Fine, she grumbled, her voice heavy with adolescent martyrdom. But if we're not going to buy cool stuff, what's even the point? Tom, surprisingly, was more amenable. Can we at least get a really big Lego set? He asked, his eyes wide and hopeful. George managed a small, tired smile. We'll see, buddy, we'll see. I, still reeling from the shock, nodded slowly. The rules made sense, intellectually. They were the sensible, responsible approach to an unimaginable windfall. But a part of me, the part that had dreamed of instant gratification, of erasing all our financial woes with a single swipe of a magic wand, felt a pang of disappointment. Still, George was right. We had to be smart. We had to protect ourselves from the pitfalls that so many lottery winners fell into. Okay, I said, my voice still a little shaky. I agree. It's a pact. We sealed it with a series of awkward high fives, and a renewed, if slightly more subdued, group hug. George looked relieved, as if the mere establishment of these rules had somehow anchored us to reality. Emily and Tom, though grumbling, seemed to accept it, perhaps lulled by the promise of future planning. However distant. Little did we know that this pact, forged in the chaotic aftermath of a burnt lasagna and a winning lottery ticket, would be broken faster than a porcelain plate falling on a tile floor. It was a noble intention, a flimsy shield against the tidal wave of temptation and external pressures that were about to crash down upon us. We believed, in that moment, that our shared understanding, our family bond, would be enough to withstand the onslaught of sudden wealth. We were incredibly, comically, tragically wrong. The ink was barely dry on our unspoken agreement, and already the seeds of its destruction were being sown. George, typically the most disciplined among us, already had a strange, almost manic gleam in his eye, a subtle shift in his demeanor that hinted at grandiose plans brewing beneath the surface. Emily, despite her feigned nonchalance, kept glancing at her phone, undoubtedly already Googling luxury items that defied our newly established no impulsive spending rule. And Tom, well, Tom was a child. His really big Lego set was probably already morphing into a life-size spaceship in his imagination. The truth was, keeping such an earth-shattering secret, especially one that promised to erase years of hardship, was like trying to hide an elephant in a broom closet. It was too big, too exhilarating, too utterly overwhelming to contain. The air in our small house, usually thick with the unspoken anxieties of poverty, was now vibrating with a different kind of energy, a nervous excitement, a barely contained exuberance that threatened to burst forth at any moment. This pact, meant to be our anchor, was nothing more than a wishful whisper against the impending hurricane of sudden wealth and the subsequent Greek comedy that was about to unfold. We had no idea how deeply and completely this newfound fortune would test our family, our values, and every single rule we had just solemnly sworn to uphold. The stage was set, the characters were ready, and the first act of the Miller family's unforgettable tragic comedy had just begun. Chapter 5. The secret that was too big to keep. The pact was barely a few hours old. A flimsy shield against the tidal wave of temptation and external pressures that were undoubtedly on their way. We had, in our collective Miller family wisdom, sworn to secrecy, to prudence, to an almost monastic restraint in the face of sudden, unimaginable wealth. But trying to keep such a colossal secret, especially in a household that generally operated on a chaotic spectrum of overt emotion and spontaneous declarations, was akin to attempting to hide an elephant in a broom closet. It was simply too big, too exhilarating, too utterly overwhelming to contain within the confines of our small, suburban home. The air in our house, once thick with the unspoken anxieties of looming bills and meager paychecks, now vibrated with a different kind of energy. It was a nervous excitement, a barely contained exuberance that threatened to burst forth at any moment, like champagne just uncorked. Each of us, in our own unique way, began to unravel under the silent, internal pressure of holding on to such a monumental truth. George, my usually grounded and somewhat predictable husband, was the first to show cracks in his carefully constructed facade of normalcy. He had always been an open book, his emotions easily readable on his face, his thoughts often spilling out before he could properly filter them. Now, however, he started behaving in ways that were utterly uncharacteristic. he would laugh alone, a sudden, almost booming sound that echoed oddly through the quiet house, causing us all to jump. He'd be staring off into space, a silly, blissful smile plastered across his face, as if he were privy to some cosmic joke that only he understood. He'd then snap back to reality, catching himself, and try to wipe the smile away, feigning seriousness, but the sparkle in his eyes, the almost manic energy that now buzzed beneath his skin, betrayed him. One particularly telling incident happened at the local diner, our usual Tuesday night haunt for a cheap burger. George, who normally calculated the tip down to the last cent, suddenly, and with a flourish, declared he was picking up the entire bill for our table, and then, inexplicably, for the table next to us as well, a bewildered elderly couple who looked at him as if he'd just announced he was the King of England. He tried to brush it off with a jovial, "Just feeling generous tonight," but his eyes were wide, almost frantic, and he kept patting his pockets, as if physically feeling for the weight of his newfound wealth. It was a small act of extravagance, but for George, it was a seismic shift, a hint that the keep our feet on the ground rule was already experiencing significant turbulence. Emily, our queen of teenage drama and social media, was even less subtle. Her entire being seemed to hum with an unbearable lightness, a barely restrained giddiness. She simply couldn't disguise her excitement. Her usual slouch was gone, replaced by an almost defiant swagger. Her eyes, typically glued to her phone, now frequently darted around, as if searching for someone to whisper her momentous news to. Her laughter, always a bit theatrical, became more frequent, louder, more joyous. She started wearing her most expensive and only branded clothes every day, even to take out the trash. The biggest giveaway for Emily, however, was her newfound disdain for public transport. For years, she'd complained bitterly about taking the bus to school. Now, the mere mention of it made her recoil as if it were coated in slime. "Ugh, Mom, the bus. Are you serious?" she'd groan, then immediately catch herself, remembering the pact. She'd then try to backtrack. "I mean, it's fine, it's just a little slow today." The internal struggle was evident on her face, a comedic ballet of teenage desire battling parental decree. She'd spend hours on her laptop, not doing homework, but researching luxury cars and private schools, leaving the browser tabs open for us to find a subtle or not so subtle hint of her burgeoning desires. And Tom, well, Tom was a child. He had the innocence and unfiltered honesty that comes with not yet understanding the complex social rules of adulthood. His concept of millions was still largely fantastical, untainted by the realities of taxes, investments, or the dangers of public perception. For him, the money simply meant the removal of all limitations. He started asking questions that, in any other context, would have been adorable but now sent shivers down our spines. "Mom," he'd ask loudly in the middle of a crowded supermarket aisle, pointing at a shiny red toy car, "can we buy a helicopter now, Dad? Like a real one, with a pilot?" George would awkwardly clear his throat, trying to deflect the question with a mumbled, "Not right now, son. Later, maybe." I'd just smile weakly at the confused shoppers, desperately trying to convey that we were merely indulging a child's vivid imagination, not planning an aerial commute to the grocery store. Tom's imagination, fueled by cartoons and an active inner world, ran wild. At the park, he'd boldly declare to other children, "My dad's gonna buy me a theme park, with my own roller coaster." He'd then glance at me, a hopeful, mischievous glint in his eye, testing the boundaries of the no-telling anyone rule. I'd have to swoop in, feigning a sudden urge to tie his shoelace, and whisper scold him, "Tom, remember what we talked about?" The internal pressure was mounting for all of us. The secret was a living, breathing entity, constantly pressing against the thin walls of our self-restraints. It wasn't just the overt actions, it was the subtle shifts. The way George would hum absent-mindedly while doing the dishes, a habit he'd abandoned years ago under the weight of financial stress. The way Emily would suddenly offer to do extra chores, a transparent attempt to butter us up for future expensive requests. The way I, myself, would catch my gaze lingering a little too long on storefronts displaying things we could never afford before. We were living in a constant state of hyper-awareness, each of us policing our own words and actions, yet simultaneously failing spectacularly. The unbreakable pact was, in reality, a transparent veil, barely concealing the enormous glittering truth that was bubbling just beneath the surface. It was a question of when, not if, the secret would explode. The pressure was building, the cracks were showing, and the Miller family was a ticking time bomb of newfound wealth. We were just waiting for the right fuse to be lit, the right person to notice the subtle changes, the right innocent question to unravel it all. And in a town like ours, where news traveled faster than a wildfire, it was inevitable. The stage was set for the next hilarious and slightly terrifying act of our family's very own Greek comedy. Chapter 6, Aunt Bertha, the Amateur Detective, and the First Clue, the Unbreakable Pact, as George had so optimistically dubbed it, felt less like a fortress of secrecy and more like a sieve, leaking bits of our astonishing truth with every passing day. The pressure inside our house was palpable, a shimmering, almost visible energy that thrummed beneath the surface of our forced normalcy. We were living a charade, and the strain of maintaining it was starting to fray our nerves. Each of us, in our own unique and often comical ways, was a walking, talking billboard for suddenly rich, but trying to hide it. George, bless his well-meaning but utterly transparent heart, was the prime offender. His attempts at discretion were hilariously inept. He started wearing shirts that were noticeably newer and better tailored than his usual worn-out work attire. Even to do yard work, he'd meticulously comb his hair, a ritual usually reserved for job interviews, just to pick up milk from the corner store. He began humming show tunes under his breath, a habit he hadn't indulged since his high school musical days, and the constant, furtive glances at his phone, checking his burgeoning bank account, became a nervous tic. He looked like a man who'd swallowed a canary and was trying desperately to look nonchalant. Emily, ever, the social creature, was a walking advertisement for newfound prosperity. Her casual outfits now included suspiciously expensive sneakers and designer handbags that definitely hadn't come from a thrift store. She started carrying a coffee cup from the trendy, overpriced cafe downtown, instead of her usual lukewarm thermos. Her entire demeanor had shifted. She walked with a bounce in her step, her head held higher, as if radiating an invisible aura of "I'm secretly loaded." Her social media posts, though carefully curated to avoid outright declarations of wealth, began to feature subtle flexes, a new pair of headphones, a perfectly manicured hand, mine, actually, from a rare Nogent salon trip, casually holding a branded shopping bag in the background. She was a silent scream of "I'm rich." In a digital echo chamber. And Tom, bless his innocent heart, was the least subtle of all. His internal filter, never particularly robust, had completely disintegrated. He spoke of new toys with an almost casual certainty, assuming they were already a done deal. He'd draw pictures of our new house with 10 bedrooms and a walk connecting the roof to the pool. At school, he got into a minor tiff with a classmate over a broken toy. "That's okay," he'd declared grandly, puffing out his chest. "My dad can buy me 100 more. We're rich." The teacher, a kind but perpetually exhausted woman, had called me to inquire about Tom's sudden flights of fancy. I'd had to feign concern, blaming it on an overactive imagination and too much sugar, all while my stomach churned with anxiety. It was a question of when, not if, the secret would burst. And the explosion came, as these things often do, in the most unlikely and yet entirely predictable form. Aunt Bertha. Aunt Bertha was a force of nature. A woman whose true calling in life was that of a gossip connoisseur and an amateur detective rolled into one formidable package. She had a sixth sense for secrets, a nose for unspoken truths that rivaled that of a bloodhound on a fresh trail. Nothing escaped Aunt Bertha's keen observation skills. She knew who was dating whom, who had gained weight, who was having financial troubles. She probably already had a detailed dossier on ours, and who had just gotten a suspiciously expensive new dental crown. Her radar for things that don't add up was always on high alert. She was also a weekly fixture at our Sunday family dinners, a tradition that had become less about fellowship and more about surviving Aunt Bertha's interrogations. This particular Sunday, she arrived precisely on time, dressed in her usual floral print dress, carrying a casserole dish that was suspiciously empty upon departure. She settled into her usual armchair, surveying the room with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. The first hint of trouble came when George, attempting to appear casual, offered to pour Aunt Bertha a glass of sparkling water. Usually, he'd just point her to the fridge. He was wearing one of his new, suspiciously well-fitting polo shirts. Aunt Bertha's eyes, sharp and assessing, narrowed slightly. "Well, George," she drawled, her voice a slow, deliberate probe. Aren't we looking dapper today? New shirt. George, caught off guard, stammered, oh, got it on sale. You know, a bargain. He attempted a nonchalant shrug, but it came off more like a nervous twitch. Aunt Bertha just hummed, a low, knowing sound that sent shivers down my spine. Then came Emily. She bounded into the living room, giggling with her cousin, her new, undeniably expensive sneakers squeaking softly on the hardwood floor. Aunt Bertha's gaze instantly locked onto them. Emily, she chirped, her voice falsely sweet, those are lovely trainers, very fashionable. Don't tell me your father finally got that promotion he's been hoping for. Her eyebrow arched, a subtle yet devastating question mark. Emily, usually quick-witted, suddenly turned beet red. She stammered, oh, these are no, Grandma gave them to me for my birthday, early present. It was a clumsy lie. Grandma had given her a hand-knitted scarf last Christmas. Aunt Bertha just hummed again, her eyes twinkling with a dangerous amusement. The tension in the room was now thick enough to cut with a knife. George was sweating. I was trying to telepathically communicate with Emily to shut up, but the final, most damning piece of evidence was yet to come. Later, as we were clearing the dinner table, Tom, in his boundless energy, raced out to the driveway to retrieve a forgotten toy from George's car. He burst back inside, his eyes wide with excitement. Mom, Dad, the new car is so cool. It has a button that makes the trunk open all by itself, he exclaimed, completely oblivious to the sudden, frozen silence that gripped the room. The new car. We had indeed bought a new car a few days ago. Not a Ferrari, not a mansion worth, but a very nice, brand new family SUV. George had argued it was a practical necessity, replacing our unreliable old Ford. It had been the first major purchase. After our win, a small indulgence that had still felt like a giant leap. We had parked it in the garage, out of sight, hoping no one would notice just yet. Aunt Bertha, who had been listening with rapt attention, slowly turned her head towards George and me. Her eyes, usually just sharp, now held a glint of triumph, like a detective who had just solved the case. A new car, she asked, her voice dangerously calm, the words drawn out slowly. Well, George, where did this sudden luxury come from? Did you finally win that sweepstakes you're always entering? Her smile was thin, predatory. George's face drained of all color. He gurgled, a strangled sound emerging from his throat. Emily, realizing Tom's colossal blunder, slapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. And then Tom, innocent, oblivious Tom, sealed our fate, with the unvarnished honesty only a child can possess. He piped up, his voice clear as a bell. In the sudden, deafening silence of the dining room, Mommy won the lottery, Aunt Bertha. The silence that followed was even more profound, more ensnaring, than the one after we first checked the winning numbers. It stretched, taut and agonizing, for what felt like an eternity. Aunt Bertha's jaw dropped. Her eyes, usually full of knowing glints, were now wide with genuine shock. George slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Emily let out a small, defeated whimper. The secret was out, and the Greek comedy, which had been simmering beneath the surface, was about to explode into a full-blown farce. Our carefully constructed wall of discretion had just been blown to smithereens by an 8-year-old and Aunt Bertha's unerring nose for a good story. Chapter 7. The telephone game, and the town in an uproar. The silence that followed Tom's innocent yet utterly devastating declaration hung in the air like a thick, suffocating blanket. Aunt Bertha, usually a rapid-fire purveyor of gossip, was momentarily stunned into an almost comical stillness, her mouth agape, her eyes wide as saucers. George, who had buried his face in his hands, let out a groan that sounded like a wounded animal. Emily, beside me, let out a small, pathetic whimper, looking as if she wished the floor would swallow her whole. As for me, my mind raced, trying to calculate the damage, to somehow, miraculously, stuff this genie back into its bottle. But it was too late. The cork was out, the genie was free, and its chaotic dance was about to begin. Aunt Bertha was the first to recover. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face, a glint of pure, unadulterated glee in her eyes. It was the look of a seasoned detective who had just cracked the biggest case of her career. The lottery, she whispered, savoring each syllable. You won the lottery. Her voice, though hushed, carried the weight of an uncontainable truth. before we could even begin to formulate a damage control strategy, which, frankly, was a futile exercise even before Aunt Bertha's involvement. She sprung into action. It was as if a dormant, highly efficient news network had just been activated. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the keypad with the speed and precision of a seasoned typist. "Mildred," she began, her voice a hushed, conspiratorial whisper, yet loud enough for us to clearly hear. "You will not believe what I just found out about the Millers." The telephone game, in our small town, was less a game and more a rapid-fire relay race. Information, particularly juicy information, traveled faster than a wildfire through dry brush. Aunt Bertha was the spark. Mildred, her best friend and fellow community watchdog, was the kindling. From Mildred, the news would leap to the church bake sale committee. From the bake sale committee, it would spread through the ladies' bridge club. From the bridge club, it would seep into the PTA meetings, the local barbershop, the town council, and finally, engulf the entire community. It was a predictable, terrifying chain reaction, and we were trapped right in the center of its accelerating momentum. By Monday morning, a mere 16 hours after Tom's fateful announcement, our quiet, unassuming house had transformed into a veritable circus. The first sign was the sudden influx of cars parked along our street, vehicles we didn't recognize, some even without two-of-town license plates. Then came the knocks. Not the polite, neighborly knocks we were used to, but insistent, almost desperate, rapping on our front door. Relatives we never knew existed began to emerge from the woodwork. Like long-lost ancestors materializing from faded photographs, there was Aunt Sally's third cousin, twice removed from Kansas, who claimed she had always felt a spiritual connection to our family and just happened to be passing through town. There was a distant uncle from Florida, who apparently had a chronic, debilitating illness that only a hefty sum of money could cure. Each arrived with a sob story, a conveniently timed family emergency, or a nostalgic tale of childhood bonds we couldn't possibly remember. They would stand on our porch, clutching tattered photo albums, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of feigned affection and transparent greed. Old friends from school who hadn't so much as returned a text in years suddenly reappeared, their messages now dripping with saccharine sweetness and thinly veiled inquiries about catching up. My inbox, usually filled with spam, was suddenly overflowing with messages like, "Remember that time in high school? My name. You were always so kind. I just knew you were destined for great things." The implication was clear. Now that we were great things, they wanted a piece of it. Emily's phone, which was usually buzzing with teenage gossip, now buzzed incessantly with requests to hang out from classmates who had previously ignored her. And then came the peddlers of dreams, the purveyors of schemes, and the opportunists of every stripe. Our doorbell became a relentless chime of unexpected visitors. There was the charmingly slick salesman from a luxury car dealership who arrived in a sleek, silver sports car that looked utterly out of place on our modest street. He parked it right in front of our house, its gleaming chrome reflecting the morning sun, as if to say, "This could be yours." He brought glossy brochures featuring vehicles with price tags that made my eyes water. "Just for a test drive, Mr. Miller," he'd purr, his smile too wide, too perfect. Next came a well-dressed man who introduced himself as a financial guru. With a revolutionary investment plan, he spoke in hushed, urgent tones about offshore accounts, tax shelters, and opportunities that were only available to a select few. His eyes darted nervously, and he carried a briefcase that looked suspiciously empty. George, bless his innocent heart, listened intently, his ears perking up at the mention of maximizing returns. I had to literally pull him away from the door. Then there was the self-proclaimed spiritual healer, with a plan to align our newfound abundance with cosmic energy, for a hefty consultation fee, of course. He wore flowing robes and carried a crystal that pulsed with an almost annoying glow. He promised inner peace and financial enlightenment, all for the low price of a significant chunk of our winnings. The requests weren't just for money. They were for favors, for jobs, for endorsements, for investments in bizarre ventures ranging from a revolutionary dog grooming salon to an organic kale farm in Antarctica. Our mailbox, once filled with bills, now overflowed with handwritten letters, legal documents, and charity pleas from organizations we'd never heard of. Some were genuinely heartfelt. Others were thinly disguised demands. The sheer audacity was, at times, comical. One afternoon, a woman I vaguely recognized from the local bakery arrived with a giant, elaborate cake shaped like a dollar sign. "Congratulations," she trilled, pushing the cake into my hands. "I just knew you'd share your good fortune. My daughter needs braces, you see." It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. The phone, bless its incessant ring, became another tormentor. It rang off the hook, morning, noon, and night. Unrecognized numbers, calls from collections agencies mistaking us for other lucky winners, calls from reporters trying to get our story, calls from people simply wanting to congratulate us, then subtly segueing into their own personal financial woes. We had to unplug it, for sanity's sake, plunging our home into a strange, unsettling quiet that was almost as jarring as the constant ringing. Our once peaceful street, which usually saw only the occasional dog walker or mail carrier, now resembled a bustling marketplace. People would drive by slowly, craning their necks to get a glimpse of the lottery winners. Some would even stop and just stare, their faces a mixture of awe, envy, and a touch of schadenfreude. We felt like specimens in a zoo, constantly under observation. The comedy grecque was indeed just beginning. The secret was out, and the consequences were unfolding with a speed and absurdity that far surpassed anything we could have imagined. Our lives, once private and unremarkable, had become a public spectacle, a magnet for every opportunistic soul. In a 50-mile radius, we were no longer just the Millers. We were the lottery winners, and that single designation had turned our world, quite literally, upside down. The privacy we had so naively sought to protect was gone, obliterated by the unstoppable force of gossip and the magnetic pull of sudden wealth. And this was just the prologue. The main act, filled with even more drama and even more outlandish comedy, was about to hit center stage. Chapter 8, The First Extravagant Gift and the Status Crisis. The aftermath of Aunt Bertha's unintentional exposé and Tom's accidental confession was nothing short of a social explosion. Our once quiet suburban haven had transformed into a whirlwind of unsolicited advice, desperate pleas, and the relentless, piercing gaze of public scrutiny. The phone, as predicted, rang off the hook, then finally off the wall, and George, in a fit of exasperated genius, had simply pulled the landline cord from the socket. Our cell phones, however, remained a buzzing, vibrating testament to our newfound notoriety. Every text and call was a fresh reminder that our secret was no longer ours. Amidst the chaos of distant relatives suddenly remembering their profound love for us and long-lost friends attempting to rekindle ancient bonds, the internal dynamics of our little family began to shift. The unbreakable pact had shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces the moment Tom uttered those fateful words, and with the shattered fragments came a potent, almost intoxicating sense of permission. The floodgates had opened. Emily, whose life revolved around the intricate social hierarchy of Northwood High, was the first to fully embrace this newfound freedom. For years, she had been a perfectly average, well-adjusted teenager, albeit one who constantly felt the subtle sting of not having what everyone else had. Her clothes were store-bought, not designer. Her backpack was functional, not fashionable, and her transportation to school was the dreaded loser cruiser, the school bus. All of these small, seemingly insignificant details had contributed to a simmering resentment, a quiet yearning for a higher rung on the social ladder. Now, with millions in the bank, Emily saw her opportunity not just to climb that ladder, but to build a golden escalator to the very top. Her eyes, usually glued to her phone for social media updates, now sparkled with a different kind of ambition. She began dropping increasingly broad hints, strategically placed within our daily conversations. "You know, Dad," she'd begin casually at breakfast, swirling her cereal with an air of sophisticated contemplation. "Chloe's parents just bought her a new car for her 17th, a little BMW. It's really cute." She'd then sigh dramatically, "But it's just so common." George, bless his heart, would try to deflect. "Well, Emily, a BMW is a very nice car, common or not." Emily would just give him a look that spoke volumes. The look said, "You have millions. What's common to us now?" The hints escalated. From cute, little BMWs to sleek, sporty convertibles, from everyone's going to prom in a limo to, "I saw this amazing Ferrari online. It's just perfect for Northwood." The pressure, subtle at first, became a persistent, almost relentless hum. Then came the full frontal assault. One evening, after a particularly trying day of fielding phone calls from long-lost cousins, Emily cornered George in the living room. Her voice, usually laced with teenage exasperation, was now imbued with an almost frightening intensity. "Dad," she began, her eyes burning with an unshakable conviction, "we have to talk about my status, social." George, who was trying to pretend to read the newspaper a prop, given his current state of agitated distraction, slowly lowered it. "Your social status, Em?" "Yes," she exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "Everyone at school knows you won the lottery." "Tom," blabbed Aunt Bertha, "told literally everyone. And now I'm the lottery girl. Do you know what that means?" George, confused, shook his head. "It means," Emily continued, leaning in, "that I can't show up in the same old clothes, or take the bus. It's like a major social faux pas. People expect things, Dad. They expect me to live up to the hype." She gestured wildly around our modest living room. "This isn't cutting it anymore. I need something that screams, 'We won the lottery.' Something that says, 'Yes, we are rich, and yes, I am fabulous.'" And then came the bombshell. "I need a car, a nice car, a sports car." Her eyes gleamed with an almost fanatical devotion. "A Porsche, or better yet, a Ferrari. Something that will truly elevate my status." George looked utterly flabbergasted. I, who had been listening from the kitchen, wiping down the counter still faintly smelling of burnt lasagna, a comforting anchor to our past, stepped into the doorway. "Emily, be reasonable," I interjected. "A Ferrari? That's insane. That's more than our house." "Exactly," Emily countered, turning to me, her face alight with a logic that only a 16-year-old with millions at their disposal could conjure. "It's for my status social, Mom. It's an investment in my reputation. Think of it as branding." George, surprisingly, seemed swayed by this audacious argument. He looked at Emily, then at me, then back at Emily. He'd always wanted Emily to be popular, to fit in. He remembered his own struggles with social acceptance in high school. And now, he had the power to give her that. The years of denying our children luxuries, of saying no to their desires due to financial constraints, had left a deep impression on him. He wanted to make up for it, to bestow upon them everything he hadn't been able to provide. While George began slowly, rubbing his chin. "A Ferrari might be a bit much, Em, but a new car, a really nice one, maybe a convertible." His voice trailed off, already succumbing to the allure of a spoiled child's dream. I stared at him, aghast. "George, we just made a pact. No impulsive spending. Keep our feet on the ground." He winced, momentarily remembering his own rules. "Yes, but status, honey. She has a point. People know now. We can't just pretend we're still scraping by." The seeds of the unbreakable pact were not just shattered, they were being actively trampled. The following day, after much heated debate and Emily's relentless campaigning, which included a PowerPoint presentation on the social benefits of luxury vehicles, George, in a moment of weakness, agreed. Not to a Ferrari, thankfully, but to a brand new, gleaming Porsche 911 Carrera. It was a staggering amount of money, a sum that could have paid off our mortgage 10 times over, bought us a comfortable retirement, or funded numerous philanthropic projects. Instead, it was spent on a car for a teenager. When the sleek silver Porsche pulled into our driveway, its engine purring like a contented beast, Emily let out another shriek of pure joy. She immediately posted a picture of it on every social media platform she had, captioning it, "New wheels, #blessed, #lottery life." The purchase sent shockwaves through Northwood High. Suddenly, Emily was the center of attention, not just the lottery girl, but the lottery girl with the Porsche. The reaction was immediate and intense. The admiration was palpable, whispers, wide eyes, friends clamoring for rides. But beneath the surface, a darker current began to swirl, envy and jealousy. Girls who had previously ignored Emily now fawned over her, asking to borrow clothes, to hang out, to be seen with her. Boys who wouldn't have given her a second glance now suddenly found her endlessly fascinating. But there were also the snide remarks, the narrowed eyes, the whispers that followed her down the hall. "She thinks she's so much better than us, now. Just because her parents got lucky. It's not fair." The drama at school escalated into a full-blown teenage soap opera. There were intrigues. Emily's best friend from before the win, Jessica, suddenly seemed cold, distant, and subtly undermined Emily at every turn. There were gossip campaigns. with rumors spreading like wildfire about how Emily was flashing her money and being obnoxious. There was even a silent boycott from a group of popular girls who refused to sit at the same lunch table as her. Emily, who had craved popularity, found herself in an uncomfortable spotlight. The very thing she thought would solve her social woes had, ironically, made them more complex. She was admired, yes, but also resented, alienated, and envied. The Porsche, meant to elevate her status, had also painted a giant target on her back. George, watching the unfolding drama from a distance, seemed momentarily taken aback. He had wanted to make his daughter happy, to give her something special. He hadn't anticipated the social fallout. The first extravagant gift, meant to bring joy, had instead ushered in a new wave of comedic for us, the outside observers, and dramatic for Emily, the participant chaos. Our Greek comedy was now truly in full swing, and its first major plot twist involved a very expensive car and a very complicated high school social scene. The Millers were learning, the hard way, that money didn't buy happiness, it bought a whole new set of problems. Chapter 9, The Dual Charity Project and the Humbling Lesson. The gleaming silver Porsche, a symbol of Emily's fleeting triumph in the treacherous social landscape of Northwood High, soon became a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of our newfound wealth. While Emily navigated the treacherous waters of teenage envy and reluctant admiration, George found himself grappling with his own brand of newfound responsibility, a struggle that would soon pivot from the ridiculous to the nearly ruinous. With the initial, impulsive splash of Emily's luxury car, a tremor of guilt began to ripple through George. He was, at heart, a good man, albeit one easily swayed by the desires of his children and a yearning to shed the shackles of years of financial struggle. He remembered his solemn promise, the unbreakable pact, now clearly a relic of a more innocent time, about keeping our feet on the ground and spending wisely. The Porsche, a glaring monument to extravagance, weighed on his conscience. He needed to re-establish his moral compass, to prove to himself, and perhaps to me, that he hadn't completely lost his head. His solution, born from a noble intention, but executed with the characteristic Miller blend of grandiosity and slight ineptitude, was to embark on a charity project. Not just any charity project, mind you. George, in his infinite wisdom, decided he would build a community center for underprivileged children, right here in Northwood. It was a genuinely heartfelt idea, a vision of a safe space where kids could learn, play, and escape the hardships of their home lives. He envisioned a shining beacon of hope, a tangible monument to our good fortune being used for the greater good. He announced his plan with a flourish at the breakfast table, pushing aside a stack of brochures for luxury watches he'd been secretly perusing. "We need to give back," he declared, his voice earnest. "We've been blessed, and it's our duty to help those less fortunate. I'm going to build a community center." Emily, still basking in the glow of her Porsche-induced popularity, merely grunted, more interested in her phone. Tom, however, brightened. "Can it have a super cool playground, Dad, with a rocket ship slide?" "Absolutely, son," George beamed, already sketching blueprints in his mind. The idea, while noble, immediately plunged us into a new kind of chaos, one laced with the political machinations of small-town bureaucracy. George, in his naivete, believed that good intentions and a hefty checkbook were all that was required. He hadn't factored in Councilman Henderson. Councilman Henderson was the epitome of the ambitious small-town politician. He was slick, perpetually smiling, and possessed an uncanny ability to sniff out any opportunity to boost his public image. He saw George's philanthropic endeavor not as an act of kindness, but as a stepping stone for his own re-election campaign. When George presented his plans to the town council, Henderson was effusive in his praise, practically falling over himself to shake George's hand. "Mr. Miller," Henderson boomed, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "this is a truly magnificent gesture, a testament to your civic duty. The children of Northwood will benefit immensely from your generosity." He then, subtly, began to hijack the narrative. He proposed that the center be named the Henderson Miller Community Center, a slight nod to George's money, but a much larger one to his own political aspirations. He insisted on being the public face of the project, taking credit for every decision, every groundbreaking ceremony, every photo opportunity. The comedy of errors began immediately. George, initially flattered by Henderson's attention, soon found himself in an unwitting ego dispute. Henderson, a master manipulator, would publicize George's initial donation, then subtly hint that he was the one pushing for even more funding, making it seem as though George was dragging his feet. He'd suggest unnecessary expansions, expensive architectural flourishes, and lavish equipment, all under the guise of making it the best for our children, knowing full well that George Ziegler, to please and to prove his generosity, would feel pressured to comply. Mr. Miller, for the basketball court, we simply must have professional-grade hoops, not those flimsy ones, Henderson would say, beaming at a public meeting. It's what the children deserve. Wouldn't you agree? George, caught off guard and wanting to appear magnanimous, would nod. Despite the already ballooning budget. The dual charity project became less about helping children and more about a passive-aggressive battle of wills and wallets between George and Councilman Henderson. Henderson kept raising the bar, proposing increasingly extravagant additions: an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a state-of-the-art recording studio, a miniature golf course. Each time, he'd present it as a modest enhancement that would truly elevate the center. Knowing George's competitive spirit and his fear of looking cheap would kick in, George, desperate to outdo Henderson and assert his own generosity, found himself trapped in a spiraling cycle of pledges. "We'll double the size of the computer lab," he declared at one press conference, after Henderson had hinted at a small library expansion. "We'll put in an IMAX screen for educational films," he announced at another, after Henderson unveiled plans for a simple projector. I watched, horrified, as our millions began to dwindle at an alarming rate, funneled into a project that was becoming less about genuine need and more about two grown men's battle for public adoration. "George," I'd plead, "we need to slow down. This is getting out of hand." "But honey," he'd argue, his eyes wide with a mix of idealism and competitive fury, "we can't let Henderson outdo us. It's for the kids." The climax of this absurd competition came during the center's soft opening ceremony. Henderson had arranged for a local news crew to be present, eager for positive press. During his speech, he modestly announced the final cost of the center, hinting that his diligent oversight had kept the budget remarkably lean. George, fueled by a simmering resentment and a few too many glasses of celebratory punch, seized the microphone. "And to show our commitment to the youth of Northwood," George declared, his voice booming over the sound system, "I am personally donating an additional $5 million to establish an endowment fund for the center, ensuring its future for generations to come." A stunned silence fell over the small crowd. Even Councilman Henderson's perpetual smile faltered for a second. $5 million. It was a sum so enormous, it made our initial winnings seem almost modest, and it was a sum that left our coffers almost completely drained. The last major chunk of our lottery winnings, the money we had carefully, or not so carefully, guarded for our family's future, was now committed to a charitable foundation, largely fueled by George's ego and his desperate need to win a philanthropic pissing contest. That it was a profound, utterly humbling lesson for George. The news reports praised his unprecedented generosity and civic spirit, but behind the scenes, panic set in. We were practically back where we started, albeit with a gleaming new community center named after us and Henderson. George, finally stripped of his competitive blindness, saw the reality of what he had done. He had given away the vast majority of our fortune. Not out of pure, selfless charity, but out of a desperate need to impress, to compete, to be seen as the ultimate benefactor. The comedy of the situation, however, came from the realization of how utterly ridiculous it all was. We had gone from worrying about burnt lasagna to worrying about out-donating a local politician, all while our bank account teetered precariously close to its pre-lottery balance. It was a classic Greek tragicomedy, hubris leading to a fall, but with enough absurdity to make you laugh through the tears. This unexpected financial setback, born from noble intentions twisted by ego, served as a painful, yet necessary, reset button. It was an opportunity, a brutal lesson in humility. For George, he finally understood that money, even millions, could vanish just as quickly as it appeared, especially when wielded by ambition and a lack of self-awareness. It also provided a stark lesson in who truly mattered. While the friends and relatives evaporated almost immediately after the news of our depleted funds spread, the genuine supporters, those who truly believed in the community center, remained. The drama was intense, the comedy was accidental, but the lesson was invaluable. Our journey through the absurdities of sudden wealth was far from over, but this incident, this magnificent, almost ruinous act of charity marked a crucial turning point. Chapter 10: The Simple Vacation Plan That Became an Odyssey. The sting of George's philanthropic misadventure with Councilman Henderson, which had nearly emptied our newfound millions, left a distinct residue of humility in its wake. The initial shock had been profound, a chilling realization that even immense wealth could evaporate if handled with reckless abandon and an overinflated ego. George, stripped of his competitive fervor, was a changed man, quieter, more reflective, and, thankfully, less prone to grand, spontaneous gestures of generosity that benefited politicians more than people. The chaotic influx of long-lost relatives and opportunistic schemers had also dwindled, as the word got out that the Miller well was now considerably drier than anticipated. Our house, thankfully, was no longer a public spectacle. However, the lingering question remained, what now? We still had a substantial, albeit significantly reduced, sum of money. The initial dream of financial freedom, untainted by the burdens of the past, now felt a bit tarnished. We needed a reset, a real one, not just a verbal pact that proved utterly useless. We needed to reconnect as a family, away from the prying eyes and the subtle and not-so-subtle pressures of our new, confusing status. It was in this spirit of cautious optimism and a desperate yearning for normalcy that I, ever the voice of reason, or at least the voice of desperate yearning for a quiet life, proposed a simple solution: a family vacation. Let's just get away, I suggested one evening, as we sat in the living room, the quiet punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic. Somewhere quiet, just us, no fanfare, no fancy hotels, no Porsches. I looked pointedly at Emily, who was attempting to scroll through Instagram with one hand, while balancing a bag of expensive chips with the other. Somewhere we can just be a family again. My vision was clear: a cozy cabin in the forest, surrounded by nature, the smell of pine, the sound of crickets. We could go fishing in a pristine lake, embark on long, leisurely hikes through winding trails, maybe even build a campfire and roast marshmallows. It would be rustic, wholesome, and, most importantly, simple. It was a dream born from years of yearning for a break, a quiet escape from the relentless grind. The idea was met with immediate, vehement protests from Emily and Tom, a synchronized chorus of teenage and preteen outrage. "A cabin," Emily exclaimed, her voice rising in incredulity, her eyes widening as if I'd suggested a forced march through the desert. "Mom, are you serious? With millions in the bank, we're going to rough it in a cabin. That's a crime against humanity. We're rich now, Mom. We're supposed to be living the dream, not camping like cave people." Tom, ever the echo chamber for Emily's more dramatic pronouncements, chimed in. "Yeah, Mom, no Wi-Fi, no pool. What are we gonna do? Talk to trees?" He shuddered theatrically. George, who had initially nodded in agreement with my proposal, suddenly looked conflicted. The allure of simplicity was appealing, especially after his recent humbling. But the appeals of his children, once easily dismissed, now held a new weight. He had, after all, just bought Emily a Porsche. How could he then condemn her to a rustic cabin? The pressure to live up to our lottery status, even with our depleted funds, was still a powerful force. "Well, honey," George began tentatively, "maybe Emily and Tom have a point. A cabin, it is a bit of a downgrade, given our circumstances." Stared at him, aghast. "Downgrade? George, it's about reconnecting, about getting away from all this madness." I gestured vaguely at the lingering, invisible presence of our lottery win. "This isn't about luxury, it's about peace." The discussion quickly evolved into an epic battle of destinations, a diplomatic negotiation that quickly devolved into a full family argument. Emily, ever the aspirational socialite, argued vehemently for Paris. "I need to see the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre. All my friends are going to Europe for spring break." Her vision involved boutique hotels, Michelin-starred restaurants, and copious amounts of high-end shopping. Tom, meanwhile, envisioned a completely different kind of escape. His little mind, fueled by endless hours of gaming and YouTube videos, conjured up images of an ultimate theme park. "I want to go to the biggest water park in the world, Dad, with the Montanha, Rusa Aquatica, and a giant arcade, and maybe one of those places where you can swim with dolphins." His idea of a vacation involved adrenaline, endless entertainment, and copious amounts of sugar. The argument raged for days. Each proposed destination was met with scorn or an equally extravagant counterproposal. My cabin in the woods was ridiculed as being too boring and primitive. Paris was deemed too much walking by Tom and not enough shopping variety by George, who was starting to show signs of his own burgeoning consumerist desires. The theme park idea, while exciting to Tom, sent shivers down my spine, imagining endless lines and screaming children. Finally, after exhausting all other options and teetering on the brink of a full-blown family meltdown, a compromise was reluctantly reached. A luxury cruise. It was, my suggestion, a desperate attempt to find a middle ground that offered some relaxation for me, some glamour for Emily, and enough activities to keep Tom entertained. It was not my idyllic cabin, but at least it wasn't a theme park full of screaming kids, or a European trip that would involve Emily dragging us through every designer store in Paris. The cruise itself became a hilarious and often desperate odyssey. We booked the most expensive suite, a floating palace with a private balcony, a jacuzzi, and our very own personal butler. Winston, our butler, was a perpetually polite man with an uncanny ability to anticipate our needs and our absurdities. He would patiently explain the intricacies of formal dining etiquette to Tom, who inevitably used his bread roll as a projectile, and discreetly retrieve Emily's phone after she accidentally dropped it into the ship's pool, a testament to her distracted pursuit of social media likes. The activities on board were so extravagant, they frequently made us laugh and cry in despair. There was a simulated surf wave, where George, in a heroic attempt to impress Tom, wiped out spectacularly, losing his swimming trunks in the process. There was a black tie gala dinner, where Emily, in a fit of teenage rebellion, showed up in a sequined crop top, much to Winston's barely concealed dismay. Tom, meanwhile, discovered the unlimited ice cream bar and proceeded to consume his body weight in sprinkles. The simple vacation I had envisioned had morphed into a floating monument to overindulgence, a microcosm of our new, absurd reality. We were surrounded by opulence, yet still managed to create our own brand of chaos. The comedy came from the sheer mismatch between our ordinary, somewhat dysfunctional family and the extravagant setting we now inhabited. We were fish out of water, desperately trying to swim in a sea of caviar and designer wear. Despite the excesses and the occasional moments of despair, there were glimmers of the connection I had hoped for. We laughed a lot. We laughed at George's terrible attempts at ballroom dancing, at Emily's exasperated sighs over her boring caviar, and at Tom's endless, sugar-fueled energy. We even managed to have a few genuine conversations on the private balcony, watching the endless expanse of the ocean. The cruise was far from my quiet cabin in the woods, but in its own bizarre way, it served its purpose. It showed us that even surrounded by luxury, we were still fundamentally the same Millers, prone to our own particular brand of endearing chaos. It also showed us that money, while opening doors to incredible experiences, didn't automatically smooth out the rough edges of family dynamics. It simply amplified them, turning a simple vacation into a high-seas odyssey of laughter, frustration, and the ongoing, hilarious struggle to adapt to a life we never thought we'd have. The Greek comedy continued, now with a panoramic ocean view. Chapter 11, The family gathered, and at war over money. The luxury cruise, a bizarre floating testament to our newfound, yet rapidly depleting wealth, had finally docked. We disembarked, feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering seasickness, not just from the ocean, but from the dizzying emotional roller coaster of the past few weeks. George, humbled by his charity project debacle, was quieter. Emily, though still clinging to her newfound social status, seemed a touch more reflective. Tom, ever the resilient one, was just happy to be on solid ground again, his dreams still filled with unlimited ice cream. The brief respite from the relentless social circus back home, however, was just that brief. No sooner had we unpacked our ridiculously oversized suitcases than the calls and visits resumed. This time, with an intensity that made the initial onslaught seem like a gentle prelude. The news of our lottery win, once a tantalizing whisper, had transformed into a roaring rumor, and now, fueled by the whispers of our near-empty coffers, a rumor I strongly suspected Aunt Bertha had meticulously cultivated. The atmosphere had shifted. The initial awe and fawning had mutated into something more aggressive, more demanding. Our Sunday family dinners, once a cherished, if occasionally chaotic, tradition, rapidly devolved into a battleground. These gatherings, which used to be about sharing a meal and catching up, transformed into a relentless series of passive-aggressive interrogations and outright demands. Relatives we barely recognized, or who had actively avoided us for years, suddenly became fixtures at our dinner table, arriving with meticulously crafted tales of woe and thinly veiled expectations of financial assistance. There was Cousin Bethany, who had a chronic back problem that only a cutting-edge experimental surgery costing 6 figures naturally could fix. There was Uncle Rick, George's long-lost second cousin, who suddenly remembered a gentleman's agreement from 40 years ago about a shared inheritance that somehow, inexplicably, involved our lottery winnings. Aunt Carol, a distant relation, who sold artisanal candles, arrived with a detailed business plan for a chain of luxury candle boutiques, expecting us to be her sole investors. The conversations at the dinner table, once filled with mundane updates about work and school, now revolved almost exclusively around money. Each relative would subtly, or not so subtly, steer the conversation towards their own financial woes, their brilliant investment ideas, or their long-standing grudges that mysteriously required a monetary settlement. You know, Cousin Bethany would sigh dramatically, clutching her lower back. It's just so hard to get by these days, especially with medical costs. A person just wishes for a little break, you know, a guardian angel. She'd then gaze pointedly at George, her eyes wide and mournful. George, who was trying to maintain a brave face, would squirm. He had learned his lesson about throwing money at problems, or, more accurately, at politicians. But the emotional blackmail was a potent weapon. The discussions became heated, almost immediately. It started with subtle jabs, veiled accusations. Remember when I lent you $20 back in '98? George, I'm sure you haven't forgotten, Uncle Rick would declare, bringing up ancient, insignificant debts, implying they were now due with interest. Then came the open conflict, the screaming matches. One particularly memorable Sunday, my own sister, Martha, who had always been fiercely independent, launched into a tirade about how unfair it was that we had won the lottery while she was struggling to put food on the table, despite her well-paying job. It's not fair. You got lucky, and now you're just hoarding it, she shrieked, gesturing wildly with a chicken drumstick. George, normally unflappable in the face of familial drama, finally snapped, hoarding it. Martha, we literally just built a community center that drained half our winnings. How much do you think we have left? This, of course, was the opening for everyone else. The news of our depleted funds had spread, but few believed it. They assumed we were hiding money, squirreling it away while they suffered. Oh, please, George, Aunt Carol scoffed, don't try to pull that poor mouth act. We all know lottery winners squirrel away fortunes. You're just being selfish. The accusations flew. You owe us, your family. You've changed. You've forgotten where you came from. The dinner table, laden with food I had painstakingly prepared, became a literal field of battle. Forks were clanged against plates, voices rose to shrill pitches, and tears, both genuine and manipulative, flowed freely. The comedy in all of this, for anyone observing from a safe distance, was the sheer absurdity of the arguments. One moment, they were arguing about a supposed verbal agreement from a child's lemonade stand. The next, they were debating the ethical obligations of millionaires to their extended family, citing obscure biblical passages and dubious financial theories. Each relative had a perfectly crafted narrative, a compelling reason why their claim to a share of our winnings was not just valid, but morally imperative. Emily and Tom, caught in the crossfire, reacted in their own ways. Emily would retreat to her room, blasting angsty music, emerging only for food and to occasionally roll her eyes dramatically at the ongoing family saga. Tom, surprisingly, found a strange kind of entertainment in it. He would sometimes discreetly take notes, sketching caricatures of the most vocal relatives, complete with speech bubbles containing their latest demands. Look, Mom, he'd whisper, holding up a drawing of Uncle Rick with a $sign for a head. He's saying his stomach hurts from not having money for pizza. The most insidious part of these gatherings was the way each family member attempted to pull the rug out from under the others to get closer to our money. They would badmouth each other, reveal long-held family secrets, and even resort to outright sabotage. Cousin Bethany once accidentally spilled red wine on Aunt Carol's meticulously presented business plan for the candle boutique, ensuring it was ruined before George could even glance at it. Uncle Rick, meanwhile, started telling exaggerated stories about Bethany's gambling addiction, painting her as an unreliable borrower. Our Sunday dinners, once a cherished time, became a source of dread. We'd brace ourselves, prepare for the onslaught, strategize how to politely or not so politely fend off the latest financial propositions. We stopped inviting people, but they just showed up uninvited, their desperation overriding any sense of social etiquette. It was a true family farce, a relentless, exhausting display of human greed and entitlement. We were the reluctant hosts of a never-ending audition for a slice of our pie. The drama was intense, the emotional toll immense, but the underlying absurdity of it all was undeniable. We were living proof that sudden wealth could, indeed, turn your family into a full-blown Greek tragedy, complete with a chorus of demanding relatives vying for a share of the spoils. The bonds of kinship, once presumed to be unbreakable, were stretched thin, warped by the magnetic pull of money. And we, the hapless lottery winners, were left to navigate this treacherous landscape, trying desperately to salvage our family while simultaneously guarding what little wealth we had left. Chapter 12: Internal Conflicts and the Loss of Identity. The endless parade of demanding relatives and the relentless pressure of their monetary expectations had by now whittled away at our collective sanity. The family gathered and at war over money had taken its toll, leaving us frayed and exhausted. Our home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. The lingering scent of burnt lasagna and cheap champagne replaced by the acrid odor of simmering resentment and unfulfilled greed. But, as the external battles raged, an even more insidious conflict began to brew within the confines of our own minds and hearts. A profound internal struggle, a slow, agonizing loss of identity. The millions, once a distant, glittering dream, had been our compass, our driving force, the imagined solution to every problem. For years, our identities had been inextricably linked to our struggles. We were the Millers, the family that worked hard, scrimped, saved, and always worried about money. Our resilience in the face of financial hardship was a badge of honor, a shared narrative that defined us. George was the tireless provider, burdened by bills. I was the resourceful homemaker, stretching every dollar. Emily was the diligent student, dreaming of a better future. Tom was the happy-go-lucky kid, blissfully unaware of the sacrifices being made for him. We knew who we were, even if who we were was just getting by. Now, the money had stripped that away. With the immediate pressure of bills gone, with the freedom to buy almost anything before George's charitable blunder, anyway, a terrifying void had opened up. We no longer had the common enemy of poverty to unite us. We no longer had the clear, tangible goals of survival to motivate us. The very thing we had yearned for, financial freedom, had become a gilded cage, trapping us in a bewildering landscape of existential questions. George, once the humble, slightly defeated patriarch, began to transform. The man who once meticulously calculated every penny and deliberated over every purchase now carried himself with an unfamiliar air of arrogance. He started interrupting people mid-sentence, pontificating on subjects he knew little about, assuming his wealth somehow conferred expertise. His voice, once gentle, occasionally took on a booming quality, as if he expected everyone to defer to his every pronouncement. He traded his comfortable, worn work clothes for designer casual wear, always a size too tight, as if to outwardly announce his new status. He also developed an unnerving obsession with proving his business acumen. Having lost a significant chunk of money in the Councilman Henderson debacle, he felt an intense need to redeem himself, not just as a philanthropist, but as a shrewd investor. He spent hours on his laptop, poring over stock market charts he barely understood, making impulsive decisions based on fleeting tips from online forums. He talked endlessly about diversifying portfolios and leveraging assets, using jargon he'd clearly just learned. His once steady hands, now manicured, would tremble slightly as he placed large, reckless bets on volatile stocks. He was no longer the dependable, cautious George. He was a caricature of a newly rich businessman, a tragicomic figure grasping for a new identity, desperate to prove his worth beyond just the lottery ticket. His humility, a brief and shining moment after the community center fiasco, had been quickly eclipsed by a new form of hubris. Emily, our teenage chameleon, embraced her transformation with a chilling eagerness. The girl who had once yearned for simple popularity now craved adoration, demanding it as her due. She became a demanding diva. Her previous teenage petulance amplified tenfold. She scoffed at anything that wasn't luxury. Her clothes had to be designer, her food organic and artisanal, her leisure activities exclusive and expensive. Her social media became an endless feed of carefully curated images, herself in designer outfits, dining at upscale restaurants, even if she hated the food, posing awkwardly next to rented sports cars. But beneath the veneer of manufactured perfection, she was lost. The friends she had gained were shallow, drawn to her money, not her personality. Her genuine friendships, the ones that had weathered her pre-lottery ordinariness, slowly withered under the weight of her new expectations and her constant need to flaunt. She was isolated, surrounded by sycophants, but utterly alone. Her identity had been the girl who got lucky, and without that constant external validation, she felt hollow. She struggled to connect, to find genuine joy in anything that didn't involve spending money. Her laughter, once genuine and spontaneous, now sounded brittle, almost forced. She was a bird in a gilded cage, trapped by the very freedom she had craved. And then there was me. I, who had always been the voice of reason, the grounded center of our chaotic family, found myself lost in the middle of it all. My role had always been clear: to manage the household, to stretch the budget, to worry, to protect. Now, with the budget stretched beyond recognition and the worries shifted from survival to excess, I felt adrift. My daily routines, once dictated by necessity, now felt meaningless. I no longer had to clip coupons, plan meals around sales, or mend clothes. The very skills that had defined my identity as a mother and a wife suddenly seemed obsolete. I found myself floating through the days, observing the escalating absurdities of my family with a strange, detached amusement, often tinged with profound sadness. I tried to mediate the conflicts, to bring some sense of sanity back to our discussions. But my voice, once listened to, was now often drowned out by the clamor of newfound desires and ego battles. I missed the simplicity, the shared struggle, that had, paradoxically, united us. I yearned for the days when a perfectly cooked, unburnt lasagna was a triumph, not just another meal among many. I was a stranger in my own life, desperately trying to find my footing in a world where money had blurred all the familiar lines. The comedy in this chapter was dark, almost farcical. It was the comedy of misfits trying to wear clothes that didn't fit, of ordinary people attempting to navigate a world of extraordinary expectations. We were like actors who had forgotten their lines, stumbling through a play without a script. The tragedy lay in the slow, insidious erosion of who we were, replaced by shallow caricatures driven by the intoxicating, yet ultimately unfulfilling, allure of wealth. We were, in essence, experiencing a crisis of identity, a profound disorientation that money had unexpectedly brought. We no longer knew who we were without the weight of the bills, without the struggle for survival, without the constant grind of daily life. The external chaos of our demanding relatives was merely a reflection of the internal turmoil that was tearing us apart. The fortune, meant to be our liberation, had become a bewildering labyrinth, and we were lost within its gleaming, empty corridors. The Greek comedy had taken a poignant turn, exposing the vulnerable core of a family struggling to find its true self amidst the overwhelming noise and glitter of sudden wealth. Chapter 13. The charming con artist and the bitter lesson, the ongoing crisis of identity within our family. A disorienting haze brought on by the sudden, bewildering shift from scarcity to a bizarre form of abundance, left us vulnerable. George, grappling with his newfound arrogance and a desperate need to prove his business prowess after the community center fiasco, was particularly susceptible. Emily was still lost in her superficial pursuit of social validation. And I, once the family's anchor, felt adrift, unsure of my purpose in this strange, new world. It was into this fertile ground of confusion and unspoken desires that the serpent entered our garden. A charming, silver-tongued con artist, he appeared almost magically, a perfectly tailored suit materializing at a local charity gala that George, in his misguided attempt at social climbing, had insisted we attend. George, still smarting from the Councilman Henderson debacle, was eager to find a legitimate, impressive way to rebuild his image and, more importantly, our dwindling fortune. He was a man ripe for the picking. The con artist's name was Marcus Thorne. He was everything George aspired to be, effortlessly charismatic, impeccably dressed, and exuding an aura of immense, yet understated, wealth. He spoke with a smooth, cultivated accent that hinted at Ivy League degrees and old money. He listened intently, making George feel like the most fascinating man in the room. He flattered George's non-existent business acumen, subtly praising his vision and innate understanding of market trends. George, starved for genuine respect after a lifetime of feeling overlooked, practically purred under the attention. Marcus presented George with what he called an exclusive, ground floor opportunity. He spoke of a revolutionary startup in the tech sector, something vaguely defined but incredibly alluring, involving disruptive innovation and transformative algorithms. It was all buzzwords and no substance, but to George's ears, it sounded like the answer to all his prayers. Marcus painted a vivid picture of exponential growth, of returning George to the pinnacle of wealth, not through a mere lottery ticket, but through shrewd, intelligent investment. "This isn't about luck, George," Marcus purred, leaning in conspiratorially over expensive cannabis. "This is about foresight, vision, recognizing the next big thing before anyone else does. And you, my friend, have that vision." George, blinded by greed and an overwhelming need to prove his value beyond the sheer chance of a lottery win, swallowed the bait hook, line, and sinker. He saw this as his chance to rewrite his narrative, to transform himself from lottery winner to tech titan. He wanted to show me, Emily, and the rest of the world that he was more than just a lucky fool. He was a brilliant businessman, capable of multiplying millions through sheer intellect. I had my reservations. From the moment I saw Marcus Thorne, a little alarm bell went off in my head. His smile was too perfect, his eyes a little too eager, his promises a little too grand. I tried to voice my concerns to George, gently at first. "He seems a little too good to be true, honey," I'd say. "Maybe we should get a second opinion, a real financial advisor." But George, under Marcus's spell, brushed me off. "You don't understand my name," he'd say, his voice tinged with impatience. "This is a closed-door opportunity. We can't let it slip away. You're just being overly cautious." His newfound arrogance made him dismissive, unwilling to hear anything that challenged his inflated sense of judgment. Emily, distracted by her own social battles and material desires, was largely oblivious. Tom, bless his innocent heart, thought Marcus Thorne sounded like a character from a spy movie and was more interested in whether he could get a jetpack from the startup. George plunged in, committing a significant portion of our remaining fortune, a sum that still represented a comfortable lifetime of security, to Marcus Thorne's elusive venture. The transactions were swift, electronic, leaving behind only digital breadcrumbs and a trail of increasingly enthusiastic emails from Marcus, filled with jargon and vague promises of impending breakthroughs. For a few weeks, George was ecstatic. He spoke of his investment with a fervor that bordered on the religious. He imagined headlines proclaiming his genius. He even started practicing his humble CEO handshake. The internal conflicts seemed to subside, momentarily replaced by a shared, albeit false, sense of purpose. We were going to be even richer. Then came the silence. The emails from Marcus became less frequent, then stopped altogether. His phone number went straight to voicemail. His revolutionary startup website, which had always been a little too slick and devoid of actual content, suddenly displayed a 404 error page not found. The dawning realization was slow, agonizing, and utterly It began with a knot in George's stomach, then a cold dread that spread through his limbs. His frantic attempts to contact Marcus were met with dead ends. The offices Marcus had boasted of visiting turned out to be virtual, untraceable. The legal documents he had presented were elaborate forgeries. We had been scammed. We lost a staggering amount of money, the bulk of what was left of our lottery winnings after the community center and the Porsche. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking, the bitterness of the lesson even more so. The initial reaction was panic, a cold, hard, sickening fear that wrapped around us like a python. We were back to square one, but worse, we had been given a taste of freedom, only to have it cruelly snatched away by our own foolishness and George's hubris. George broke down, literally sobbing, his arrogance crumbling into a heap of shame and despair. "I'm so stupid," he choked out, his voice raw with self-loathing. "I ruined everything." The panic quickly morphed into indignation and a burning desire for justice. We contacted the police, who were sympathetic but ultimately helpless. Marcus Thorne, a ghost in the digital ether, had vanished without a trace. his trail meticulously covered. We had been victims of a sophisticated, meticulously planned fraud. This was a bitter lesson in the harshest possible way. It was a brutal awakening to the dangers of wealth, the sharks that circled those who suddenly come into money, and the insidious ways that unchecked ego can lead to self-destruction. The dream of effortlessly multiplying our fortune had turned into a nightmare. The comedy, which had previously been born from the absurdities of new wealth, now took a dark, almost tragic turn. It was the comedy of fools, of people who had been given a gift and squandered it, not through malice, but through a dangerous mix of inexperience, pride, and a desperate craving for validation. But, surprisingly, amidst the devastation, a strange thing happened. The external pressure from demanding relatives, which had been so overwhelming, began to dissipate. The news of our new, even more dramatic financial setback spread like wildfire. The Millers lost it all to a con artist became the new headline in the town's gossip network. The vultures, sensing there was no longer any meat on the bone, dispersed. Our phone finally stopped ringing. The circus packed up its tents, and in that new, quiet devastation, stripped of our illusions and a significant chunk of our money, a new, tentative clarity began to emerge. The loss, though painful, also offered a strange kind of liberation. It forced us to confront the true cost of our misplaced desires and the dangerous allure of instant gratification. The superficial trappings of wealth had vanished, leaving behind the bare bones of our family. This bitter lesson, this profound fall from grace, was precisely what we needed to begin the long, arduous journey of finding our true selves again, of learning to trust each other, and of finally understanding the real value of what we had. Chapter 14. The return to roots and the quest for simplicity, the sting of Marcus Thorne's betrayal. The cold, hard reality of our significant financial loss was a shock to the system. It was a brutal, utterly humbling experience that stripped away the last vestiges of our newfound arrogance and forced us to confront the consequences of our choices. The grand illusions of endless wealth, of effortless gains, shattered like glass, leaving behind a bitter taste and a gaping hole in our bank account. But surprisingly, amidst the devastation, a strange and unexpected clarity began to emerge. The silence that followed the departure of the vultures, the demanding relatives and the opportunistic schemers, was not just a relief. It was a profound stillness, a space in which we could finally hear ourselves think. George, in particular, was profoundly affected. The man who had been strutting with a newfound swagger, boasting of his business acumen, was gone. In his place was the George I knew and loved, albeit a little wiser and infinitely more chastened. The shame of being conned, of having squandered a significant portion of our remaining fortune through pride and a desperate need for validation, hit him hard. For days, he was withdrawn, quiet, his shoulders once again slumped with a different kind of burden, the weight of his own misjudgment. But then, a shift. One morning, I found him in the garage, not on his laptop, poring over stock charts, but with his hands covered in grease, attempting to fix our old Ford Focus, the one that had stubbornly refused to start just before our lottery win. He looked up, a smudge on his cheek, and offered a small, tentative smile. "Figured it's time to get this old girl running again," he mumbled. "No point in spending money on repairs if I can do it myself." It was a small act, but it was a return to his roots, a familiar, practical George, emerging from the debris of his short-lived financial empire. He started spending less time glued to financial news and more time in the garden, meticulously tending to the overgrown weeds that had taken over during our whirlwind of luxury. He rediscovered his old toolbox, fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen, the one that had contributed to the burnt lasagna incident, with a quiet satisfaction. He began to value things not for their price tag, but for their utility, their longevity, their ability to be fixed. The desperate need to impress, to compete, to prove his worth through ostentatious spending, had evaporated, replaced by a quiet, almost meditative focus on simple, tangible tasks. He found solace in the concrete, the repairable, the real. He decided to step away from risky investments altogether, preferring to keep what little we had left in secure interest accounts. "No more chasing unicorns," he declared one evening, a wry smile on his face. "I think I prefer reliable old workhorses now." Emily, too, began a quiet transformation. The Porsche, once the pinnacle of her social aspirations, now sat in the driveway, a symbol of fleeting popularity and shallow friendships. The constant pressure to maintain her status had been exhausting, and the realization that most of her new friends had vanished the moment word got out about our financial setback was a painful, yet necessary, dose of reality. She saw firsthand that the admiration she craved was conditional, based on what she had, not who she was. One afternoon, I found her not on her phone scrolling through social media, but curled up on the couch, reading a book, a physical book, not a digital one. She started spending less time on elaborate makeup routines and more time genuinely connecting with her few remaining, loyal friends from before the lottery. She even started volunteering at the local animal shelter, a place she would have scoffed at weeks ago. She'd always loved animals, but had dismissed it as too messy or not glamorous enough. Now, she found genuine joy in caring for the abandoned pets, their unconditional affection, a welcome balm after the transactional nature of her recent social interactions. She seemed to be searching for something real, something meaningful, beyond the superficial glitter of wealth. Her conversations shifted from designer brands to the plight of rescue dogs, a change that was both surprising and heartwarming. As for me, the feeling of being adrift began to recede, with the external pressures gone, and George and Emily finding their own paths back to something resembling normalcy. I too started to rediscover my rhythm. I began to cook my own meals again, not out of necessity, but out of a renewed sense of purpose and a desire for comfort. The smell of fresh ingredients, slowly simmering on the stove, was a welcome contrast to the expensive, often tasteless, catered meals and restaurant takeouts that had defined our recent weeks. I even made lasagna, and this time, I managed not to burn it. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. I found myself rediscovering the simple joys I had forgotten in the blur of sudden wealth. A quiet cup of coffee on the porch in the morning, a walk in the park, reading a book without constantly checking my phone. I realized how much of my identity had been tied to my roles as a careful planner, a budgeter, a problem solver. Without those problems, I had felt useless. Now, I saw that the problem wasn't the absence of problems, but the absence of genuine purpose. We started to seek simplicity again, almost instinctively. We began to value the small things that had been overshadowed by the pursuit of grand gestures and extravagant possessions. A family movie night became more precious than a lavish cruise. A home-cooked meal became more satisfying than a Michelin-starred dinner. We started talking to each other again, truly talking, not just about money, but about our day, our feelings, our fears, and our tentative hopes for the future. The loss of most of our money, paradoxical as it sounds, was the best thing that could have happened to us. It was a painful course correction, a brutal but necessary lesson in humility and perspective. We realized that the fortune hadn't brought us happiness, it had brought us chaos, external pressures, and an internal identity crisis. It had almost torn us apart, but in losing it, we found something far more valuable, a chance to rediscover ourselves, to reconnect as a family, and to appreciate the enduring value of simple things, of genuine connection, and of the fundamental truth that real wealth lay, not in what you accumulated, but in who you were and how you live. The Greek comedy, which had verged on tragedy, was now slowly, tentatively, finding its way back to a more hopeful, grounded narrative. Chapter 15, Family Reconciliation and Renewed Purpose. The bitter taste of deception, the stark emptiness in our bank accounts, and the quiet departure of the fair-weather relatives had, paradoxically, brought a strange kind of peace to the Miller household. The loud, chaotic clamor of sudden wealth had faded, replaced by a subdued, almost reflective atmosphere. The return to roots was underway, a slow, often awkward, but deeply necessary process. George was fixing things around the house, Emily was finding solace at the animal shelter, and I was rediscovering the simple joys of a home-cooked meal. But the most significant change, the one that truly marked the turning point in our Greek comedy, was the beginning of family reconciliation. The crisis had, in its brutal honesty, united us. Stripped of the superficial distractions and the corrosive allure of endless money, we were forced to look at each other, truly look, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The arguments over who deserved what, the silent resentments, the individual quests for identity through lavish spending, all of it now seemed incredibly petty, almost ridiculous, in the face of our shared folly. We had been through a fire, and though we were singed, we were still standing. Together. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, no one demanding money, no one boasting of new acquisitions, George cleared his throat. He looked at me, then at Emily, then at Tom. His eyes, no longer gleaming with avarice or ego, held a raw vulnerability I hadn't seen in months. Look, he began, his voice a little rough. I messed up, big time. The community center thing, the con artist. I got carried away. I let the money. It changed me. And I'm sorry. To all of you. He looked genuinely remorseful, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his apology. Emily, surprisingly, was the first to respond. She put down her phone, a rare act of full attention. Yeah, Dad, you did, she said, without malice, just simple honesty. But I messed up too. I was totally obsessed with the Porsche and being popular. And those friends, they totally ditched me the second things got rocky. It was kind of awful. Her voice was small, tinged with a newfound self-awareness. Tom, sensing the shift in the emotional landscape, piped up, and I just wanted all the video games, and a helicopter. He looked at George. Are we still gonna be poor, Dad? His innocent question cut through the lingering tension. George managed a weak smile. No, buddy, not poor. We've still got enough for security, for a comfortable life, just not millions anymore. And we're going to be smarter about it, all of us. He looked at me. We have to be smarter about it. It was a small conversation, but it broke the dam. The next few days were filled with similar, hesitant, yet increasingly honest dialogues. We started to talk again, truly talk, not just about money, but about our experiences, our mistakes, our fears, and our tentative hopes for the future. We began to laugh at our own madness, at the sheer absurdity of the journey we had just undertaken. We recounted the most outlandish demands from relatives, the most ridiculous promises from the con artist, and our own comical attempts at navigating the world of the wealthy. Laughter, genuine and hearty, filled our home once more, a much more pleasant sound than the bitter arguments of recent weeks. The realization slowly dawned on us. Despite all the drama, the near ruin, the betrayals, we were still a family, and that, more than any amount of money, was our true fortune. We had endured, we had learned, and most importantly, we were still here for each other. The crisis, which had threatened to tear us apart, had instead forged a new, stronger bond, tempered by shared experience and newfound humility. With this renewed sense of unity came a renewed purpose. We still had a comfortable sum, enough to live without financial anxiety, enough for college funds, for a decent retirement. But we no longer wanted to simply hoard it, or spend it on frivolous luxuries. We wanted to use it for a purpose greater than ourselves. We wanted to help people, genuinely, without ego and without hidden agendas. This time, George approached philanthropy with a different mindset. He meticulously researched local charities, looking for organizations that genuinely made a difference, not just those with the best public relations. He sought out smaller, grassroots initiatives, places where he could see the direct impact of our contributions. He no longer cared about having his name on a plaque or competing with local politicians. His motivation was pure, to make a real, tangible difference. We decided to support a local youth mentorship program, providing funding for after-school activities and tutoring for underprivileged kids. We also invested in a scholarship fund for students from low-income families in Northwood, ensuring that talented young people had a chance at higher education, regardless of their financial background. Emily, surprisingly, became a passionate advocate for animal welfare, using a portion of her savings. Yes, she actually had some left after the Porsche debacle to help fund a no-kill animal shelter. Tom, inspired by George's renewed commitment to community, started a small neighborhood cleanup initiative, earning a surprising amount of local goodwill and a few more Legos. Thanks to appreciative neighbors, the money, which had once been a source of intense discord and superficial desires, was slowly, steadily, transforming into a tool for good. It was no longer a burden, no longer a test of our self-control, but an instrument for positive change. We learned to be discreet about our giving, preferring to work quietly behind the scenes. The lessons learned from Aunt Bertha and Councilman Henderson were deeply ingrained. The comedy in this new phase was softer, gentler. It came from the everyday absurdities of our reformed selves. George, still occasionally prone to humming show tunes, now did so while volunteering at the youth center, trying to teach kids basic carpentry. Emily, once a diva, would grumble good-naturedly about the smell of wet dog fur at the shelter, but her eyes would sparkle when a timid animal finally trusted her. I found humor in George's newfound thriftiness, as he would now meticulously compare prices at the grocery store, even though we no longer needed to. It was a charming, slightly ironic return to our old habits, but now by choice, not by necessity. Our Greek comedy, which had teetered on the brink of tragedy, was now finding its way back to a more hopeful, redemptive narrative. We were learning that true wealth wasn't measured in bank balances or material possessions, but in purpose, in connection, and in the quiet satisfaction of making a difference. Each of us, in our own way, was finding our place and our purpose again. Not in the glitter of millions, but in the genuine, messy, and ultimately, deeply fulfilling work of rebuilding our lives and contributing to something larger than ourselves. The journey was far from over, but the path ahead, though still uncertain, felt clearer, brighter, and infinitely more meaningful. Chapter 16, The Legacy and the Positive Impact on the Community. The turbulent storm of sudden wealth and subsequent loss had finally passed, leaving our family battered, but, remarkably, stronger. The lessons learned from Marcus Thorne's deception and Councilman Henderson's ego-driven philanthropy had been painful but transformative. George had shed his ill-fitting mantle of arrogance, returning to his grounded, practical self. Emily, having experienced the emptiness of conditional popularity, now found genuine connection in selfless acts. And I, once lost in the bewildering landscape of luxury, rediscovered my purpose in the quiet rhythms of home and family. The reconciliation had been profound, forging a new, deeper bond among us, tempered by shared adversity and a renewed sense of humility. With our family unit strengthened and our individual identities slowly, tentatively reforming, a new chapter began to unfold, one of renewed purpose and genuine impact. We still had a comfortable sum of money remaining, enough to ensure financial security without the overwhelming burden of immense wealth. But this time, our approach to it was fundamentally different. The pursuit of personal indulgence had been replaced by a quiet, unwavering commitment to making a positive difference. Our journey through the absurdities of the lottery win had ironically taught us the true value of money, not as an end in itself, but as a tool, and we were determined to wield this tool with wisdom, discretion, and a genuine desire to uplift our community. George, having learned the hard way about public grandstanding, became a master of discreet philanthropy. He no longer sought headlines or accolades. Instead, he meticulously researched local nonprofits, visiting them personally, talking to their founders, and understanding their genuine needs. He found particular satisfaction in helping smaller, grassroots organizations that often struggled for funding but made a profound difference on the ground. We became known, not as the lottery winners, but as the quiet, reliable benefactors who genuinely cared. One of George's primary focuses became the local youth mentorship program that we had tentatively supported after his humbling experience. He didn't just write checks. He became actively involved. He volunteered his time, sharing his practical skills in carpentry and basic mechanics with the teenagers. He helped them set up a small workshop, teaching them how to fix bicycles and build simple furniture. He organized regular field trips to local businesses, exposing the kids to different career paths. The center, initially overshadowed by Councilman Henderson's name, slowly but surely began to be associated with George's quiet dedication and the tangible impact he was having on the lives of the young people. The laughter and chatter of the children filled the halls, a far more satisfying sound than any politician's empty rhetoric. Emily, surprisingly, discovered her passion in animal welfare. Her initial volunteering at the animal shelter, born from a need for genuine connection, blossomed into a deep commitment. She used her newfound and carefully managed allowance, along with a portion of our remaining lottery funds, to significantly contribute to the shelter's needs. She organized adoption events, creating appealing social media campaigns, this time for a cause, not for self-promotion, that significantly increased adoption rates. She spearheaded a fundraising drive for a new, modern veterinary wing for the shelter, personally overseeing the project from inception to completion. Her once shallow pursuits of social status had transformed into a profound understanding of compassion and the power of giving back to those who couldn't speak for themselves. Her smile, once performative, was now radiant with genuine fulfillment as she watched a rescued animal find its forever home. She learned that true influence came not from showing off, but from making a real, meaningful difference. As for me, I found my purpose in supporting George and Emily in their newfound endeavors, and in nurturing our home as a true haven. I managed the remaining funds with a newfound prudence, ensuring every dollar was used wisely and impactful. I organized events at the community center, coordinating volunteers and ensuring the programs ran smoothly. I also championed a local initiative for financial literacy, a program designed to teach young adults the very lessons we had learned the hard way about managing money, avoiding scams, and building sustainable financial habits. It was my way of taking our painful experience and turning it into a valuable resource for others. The community, which had once viewed us with a mixture of awe, envy, and suspicion, slowly began to see us differently. The whispers of the lottery winners gradually faded, replaced by genuine appreciation for our consistent and impactful contributions. We weren't just the family who got lucky. We were the family who, after a stumble, had used their good fortune to uplift others. We became known for our philanthropy and our unwavering commitment to the well-being of Northwood. The community center, now thriving with educational programs, sports activities, and mentorship initiatives, became a shining example of what focused, selfless giving could achieve. The animal shelter flourished, providing a safe haven and new homes for countless animals. The scholarship fund sent bright, deserving students to college, changing the trajectory of their lives. The money, which had once been a source of dizzying chaos and internal conflict, had truly become a tool for the good. It was no longer a burden, no longer a test, but an instrument for positive transformation. We had gone from a family drowning in debt and despair, to winning a fortune, to almost losing it all through hubris and folly, only to emerge with a profound understanding of what truly mattered. The story of the Miller family, once a classic Greek comedy of errors and excess, now became a testament to redemption and resilience. Our journey, with its dramatic highs and comedic lows, had morphed into an inspiring narrative of how money, when wielded with wisdom, humility, and genuine compassion, could indeed transform lives, not just our own, but the lives of countless others in our community. We had found our true riches, not in the numbers on a lottery ticket, but in the enduring impact of our actions and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, dedicated to purpose beyond ourselves. This was our true legacy, far more valuable than any sum of money could ever be. Chapter 17, The Burnt Lasagna Again and the Cycle of Life. Years later, the sharp edges of our lottery saga had softened, smoothed by time and the quiet rhythm of a life redefined. The frantic pace of sudden wealth, the bewildering chaos of its initial impact, and the painful lessons learned from our mistakes had receded into the realm of family lore. They were stories we told, sometimes with a wry smile, sometimes with a knowing glance, but always with a profound sense of gratitude for the journey. Our fortune, no longer a source of frantic worry or extravagant indulgence, had settled into a comfortable, sustainable hum, a quiet background note to the melody of our everyday lives. It was another Tuesday evening, years after that fateful night. George and I were, once again, in the kitchen, and yes, in an astonishingly poetic twist of fate, the lasagna burned again, not completely carbonized like that first time, but a good, solid crisp around the edges, with a persistent, familiar scent of singed cheese and tomato sauce wafting through the air. The smell, which once signaled despair and financial doom, now brought a wave of nostalgia, a strange, comforting anchor to the memory of where it all began. George, ever the optimistic chef despite his repeated culinary failures, peered into the oven, his brow furrowed in mock dismay. "Well, would you look at that," he mumbled, pulling out the slightly charred dish. "Some things never change, I guess." He glanced at me, a familiar wry smile playing on his lips. I chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that echoed in the now spacious, well-appointed kitchen. This kitchen, unlike the cramped, perpetually leaking one of old, was a testament to our newfound stability. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was functional, beautiful, and most importantly, free from the shadow of unpaid bills. "Some things, indeed," I agreed, a smile mirroring his own. "At least we don't have to worry about wasting the ingredients this time." The contrast between this moment and that first fateful Tuesday was stark, almost comical. Then, the burnt lasagna had been a symptom of our deeper struggles, a symbol of our despair. Now, it was a minor inconvenience, a humorous reminder of how far we had come. It was a testament to the cycle of life, how seemingly insignificant moments could bookend monumental shifts. Just then, the front door opened, and the familiar sounds of keys jingling and cheerful voices filled the air. Emily, now a brilliant and compassionate veterinarian, walked in, her scrubs a bit rumpled, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired but fulfilled, her eyes bright with the quiet joy of a person who had found her true calling. The demanding diva of her teenage years was long gone, replaced by a grounded, empathetic woman who spent her days healing animals and advocating for their welfare. She carried a large bag of fresh produce, a nod to her newfound appreciation for healthy, home-cooked meals over expensive restaurant fare. "Smells familiar," she said, wrinkling her nose playfully as she hugged me. "Then George, did someone burn the lasagna again?" Her tone was light, teasing, a stark contrast to her exasperated teenage complaints of old. A moment later, Tom bounded in, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He was no longer the hyperactive child dreaming of helicopters, but a thoughtful, engaging history teacher at the local high school. He had a passion for understanding the past, a quiet wisdom that belied his relatively young age. He spent his days inspiring young minds, teaching them about the grand narratives of humanity, including, no doubt, the unexpected twists of fate that could alter a family's destiny. He saw the world with a sense of perspective that only someone who had experienced such a dramatic shift could truly possess. "The Miller family classic," Tom declared, sniffing the air with mock seriousness. "A culinary tradition." He dropped his backpack and immediately headed for the stereo, putting on some soft jazz, a stark contrast to the blaring pop music Emily used to favor. The house, once filled with the tension of financial worry or the clamor of greedy relatives, was now simply full of laughter, easy conversation, and the comforting aroma of a slightly crispy lasagna. We sat around the dining table, the one that had once groaned under the weight of bills and later, under the demands of avaricious family members, now simply a place for shared meals and genuine connection. We talked about their days. Emily recounted a challenging surgery she'd performed, her passion evident in every word. Tom discussed a lively debate he'd had with his students about historical figures, his intellectual curiosity shining through. George shared a story about a kid at the community center who had finally mastered a difficult carpentry joint, his face alight with pride. I, in turn, spoke of the progress of the financial literacy program and how it was helping young families avoid the very pitfalls we had encountered. There were no whispers of envy, no subtle probes for money. The past, with all its chaotic glory, was just that, the past. It was a story that had shaped us, refined us, but no longer defined us. The money, the initial lottery win, was merely the catalyst that had propelled us onto this unexpected journey. It had shown us the best and worst of human nature, including our own. The truth was, the millions had done their job. They had given us security, peace of mind, and the freedom to pursue our passions. But they had also taught us an invaluable lesson. Real wealth wasn't measured in bank balances, but in the strength of our bonds, the pursuit of meaningful purpose, and the quiet contentment of a life lived with integrity. That's the evening wore on, and the last of the slightly burnt lasagna was devoured. A comfortable silence settled over the table. Emily and Tom helped clear the dishes, their easy camaraderie a testament to the growth they had undergone. George put his arm around my shoulder, his touch familiar and comforting. We stood there, side by side, looking at the familiar scene of our family, living out the quiet miracle of an ordinary Tuesday evening. The cycle of life, with its unexpected twists and turns, had brought us full circle, but to a place infinitely richer than where we had begun. The burnt lasagna had reminded us of the day it all started, and in that memory, we found not regret, but a profound enduring gratitude for the journey, and for the simple, precious reality of our imperfectly perfect lives. Chapter 18, The Ticket to Happiness, and the True Treasure. The aroma of slightly burnt lasagna, a whimsical ghost of our past, still lingered in the air, mixing with the low hum of conversation and soft jazz. Emily and Tom, now grown and thriving, had retreated to the living room. Their easy banter, a comforting backdrop to the quiet contentment that settled over George and me. The chaotic, often absurd, journey initiated by that single lottery ticket had culminated here. In this moment of mundane beauty, in the quiet heart of our home, as I put away the last of the dishes, George came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. His touch was familiar, comforting, a testament to years of shared laughter, tears, and an extraordinary adventure that had tested the very fabric of our family. "You know," he murmured, resting his chin on my shoulder, "sometimes I still can't believe it all happened. It feels like a crazy dream." "A very vivid, very expensive dream," I replied, a soft smile on my face, "and quite a bit of it was a nightmare, too." He chuckled. "True, but look at us now, we made it." Indeed, we had. The initial lottery win, the ticket to happiness we had so naively believed it to be, had brought us many things. It brought millions of dollars, yes, but it also brought an unprecedented level of drama, the frenzied celebration, the impossible secret, the relentless onslaught of demanding relatives, the ill-advised charity project fueled by ego, the dazzling, but ultimately isolating Portia, and finally, the crushing blow of the charming con artist. Each event had been a dramatic peak in our unexpected journey. Our lives had transformed from a quiet stream into a raging river, with rapids and waterfalls that threatened to capsize us at every turn. And through it all, there was the comedy, the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of it all. George's clumsy attempts at discretion, his ill-fitting designer clothes, his sudden pronouncements on global finance, Emily's teenage status crisis, and her PowerPoint presentation on luxury cars, Tom's innocent blunders that spilled our deepest secrets, Aunt Bertha, the human gossip antenna, and Councilman Henderson, the master of political opportunism, who turned philanthropy into a bizarre battle of wills. The entire saga had been a Greek tragicomedy, a grand, sprawling narrative filled with characters both endearing and exasperating, driven by universal human flaws like greed, pride, and the desperate yearning for a better life. We had been the unwitting protagonists in our own farcical play, learning lessons through humiliation and laughter. But beyond the drama and the comedy, what truly defined our story was the redemption, the bitter taste of loss, the realization that we had almost squandered everything, forced us into a painful but necessary period of self-reflection. It was a stripping away, a process of shedding the superficial layers that wealth had imposed upon us. We learned that money, while powerful, was not a panacea. It couldn't buy genuine happiness, true friendship, or an unshakable sense of self. In fact, for a time, it had almost cost us those very things. The turning point came when we were at our lowest, after the con artist had vanished, leaving us feeling foolish and exposed. It was in that shared vulnerability that we found our way back to each other. We stopped blaming, started listening, and began to truly reconcile as a family. The forced simplicity that followed, George fixing the old car, Emily finding solace at the animal shelter, my own return to the comforting routines of home, allowed us to rediscover our roots. We found joy in the small things, in acts of genuine connection and kindness, rather than grand gestures of material excess. This rediscovery led to a renewed purpose. We realized that our wealth, though diminished, still held immense power for good. We chose to use it wisely, not for personal gain or fleeting status, but to make a positive impact on our community. George, humbled and discreet, channeled his energy into the youth mentorship program, becoming a quiet force for good. Emily found her passion in animal welfare, transforming her social media savvy into a powerful tool for advocacy. And I, by establishing a financial literacy program, turned our past mistakes into valuable lessons for others. The house grew quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, a peaceful hum of contentment, not the suffocating silence of despair. The lingering aroma of the burnt lasagna served as a poignant reminder of that fateful night, the catalyst for everything that followed. It was a symbol of our humble beginnings, a marker of the chaos that had erupted, and ultimately, a testament to the resilience of our family. We had set out to find happiness through the lottery ticket, believing it held the ultimate key to a joyful life. What we found, instead, was a tumultuous odyssey that stripped us bare, forced us to confront our flaws, and ultimately led us back to the most fundamental truths. The true treasure we unearthed was not in the millions that flowed into and out of our bank account, but in the resilience of our family. It was in our ability to learn from our mistakes, to support each other through profound change, and to find a shared purpose beyond material gain. We learned that money can provide comfort and opportunities, but it doesn't define who you are. It doesn't guarantee happiness, and it certainly doesn't prevent drama. True happiness, we discovered, lay in the quiet moments of connection, in the shared laughter over a slightly burnt dinner, in the satisfaction of contributing to something meaningful, and in the enduring, unbreakable bonds of family. S. George squeezed my hand. A silent understanding passed between us. The lottery ticket had been a bewildering, life-altering gift, a catalyst for an unforgettable journey. But the real gift, the ultimate prize, was the family we had become, wiser, stronger, and infinitely richer in spirit. The cycle of life had brought us back to a simple Tuesday evening, with a slightly burnt lasagna, but the Millers were no longer the same. We were living proof that sometimes, losing everything is precisely what you need to find what truly matters.